Shadow Slave, Chapter 21-21, First Performance. 1,270 words. His words hung insolence. The sleepers looked at Sunny with a hilarious assortment of emotions, ranging from bewilderment to shock. The young man with humorous eyes just smiled politely. Tobahonist, getting an ascended aspect during the first nightmare was extremely rare. He was certainly someone special, maybe even outstanding. Actually, despite their apparent differences, the young man somehow reminded Sunny of Hero, Oro of the Nine. There was a special type of calculating coldness hidden deep inside their eyes. He had encountered such people before, mostly among the veterans of various street gangs in the outskirts. They simply called this type of coldness, murder math. Basically, it was a habit experienced fighters developed. No matter where they were and what mood they were in, there was always a sober part of their minds constantly calculating the most efficient way of killing the person in front of them, just in case such need arises. Why do I have to antagonize someone like that, of all people? But Sunny really had no grounds to complain. After all, he brought this on himself. After a few seconds, one of the young man's companions finally blinked and said, friend, you must not know a lot about the spell. Caster's results are truly remarkable. Then, with a furtive glance at the remarkable caster, headed. He's a legacy, after all. An actual, living and breathing descendant of an awakened clan. Sunny reevaluated his opinion of the humorous young man. Legacies were known to be trained for their eventual entrance into the spell from the moment they could walk. For them, being infected was a certainty instead of a possibility. They were extremely formidable people. Just great, he thought bitterly and made his frown deepen. Are you trying to pull a prank on me? You call this remarkable? The bewilderment in the eyes of these sleepers was slowly being replaced by hostility. Listen, friend, if you didn't think that an ascended aspect is remarkable, then please share with us your own amazing results. What, pray tell, was your appraisal? Caster himself was still keeping quiet and smiling. However, his defenders were growing restless. This was exactly what Sunny wanted to happen. Hesmold with utter contempt. I would let you know. My appraisal was, it was, glorious. Yes, glorious, and the aspect you acquired was of the divine rank. After that, he received a number of strange looks. No one had ever received a divine aspect before, so, of course, they were starting to think that he was lunatic. But there was still a sliver of doubt. Maybe that strange guy was a descendant of a powerful clan. A peerless prodigy. Maybe his appraisal was, indeed, glorious. Sunny had to dispel a tiny bit of doubt. Mind you, I'm not some lofty legacy. PFF'd. I'm from the outskirts. I've never even received combat training. All that training and he only got an excellent. What did he do during the nightmare? Pick his nose the whole time. The expressions of all the sleepers that were listening to his bragging instantly changed. An outskirt rat with no training. Yeah, sure. Who was headring to fool? Finally, with the same polite smile, Caster spoke. Glorious. That is interesting. Would you mind telling us what were your achievements in the nightmare? Sunny grinned. Sure, no problem. First of all, Eichel then, an awakened tyrant. Every, cost him a couple of moments of intense pain, but he didn't let it show on his face. His expression was nothing but smug and confrontational. The mere mention of Fatarant, let alone an awakened one, made a couple of sleepers smile with ridicule. Oh, really? How did you kill it? An arrogant look appeared on Sunya's face. How? Let me tell you, it didn't even have to lift a finger. I just spat, and it was torn to pieces. Which was true. Sunny had spat a mouthful of blood on the altar, and as a result, Mountain King was ruthlessly dismembered by Shadow God. Someone openly laughed. This guy is either insane or purposefully messing with us. Listen here, shorty, have some decency, okay? Who would believe such alley? Sunny was genuinely angry. He went to retort, saying that Huey sent short. But he couldn't, because that would be Lee, damn it. So, instead, he just gritted his teeth and said with a voice full of outrage. I can't answer that, because it's not Ali. Are you really insisting that you had killed an awakened tyrant, Adarant? And with a bit of spitnalis? Sunny knitted his brows. That's the truth. More laughter followed. Crazy bastard. He actually believes in his own crap. Insane. Hesh insane. Unexpectedly, Caster stopped his companions. Guys, after the laughter quieted down, he said in a friendly manner. What else did you achieve? What? That wasn't Anna. Sunny raised his chin. Let me think. Oh. I also killed an awakened swordsman. Really? How did you do that? Acting asked how he was a little bit embarrassed. Sunny looked down. Actually, that time I had to lift a finger. I even had to shake it a couple of times. That was enough to kill him, though. He was holding the silver bell between his fingers, which led to Hero being attacked and eventually killed by the tyrant. So, technically, all his statements were true. What a crackpot. Ha, can you believe this idiot? Poor bastard. Not only Ishweek, Hesh also lost it. Caster gave his companions a long look and then turned to Sunny. Anything else? Sunny blinked. Time for the finishing touch. Something else. Right, I communicated with a bunch of gods, even though they were all dead. I made one of them wake up. Heg of me blessing. I was blessed by a god, do you all understand? The sleepers were silently shaking their heads or looking at them with pity. Caster sighed. I see. Well, in comparison to your achievements, mine do look rather average. Thank you for sharing with us. I hope you'll be as successful once we enter the dream realm. Sunny smiled with a look of smug superiority on his face. You better believe it. With that, he turned around and walked away. That's a job well done. He was pretty sure that after this performance, no one would ever believe that he actually had some kind of a powerful aspect or did anything worthy of notice during the nightmare. He only told them the truth, and yet managed to make everyone believe in the opposite of the truth. Such an incredible feeling. What did they think of him now? They thought that he was weak, grew up without any education in the outskirts, and had no training. More than that, he was apparently either insane or incredibly stupid. His temper was terrible, truly pathetic and pitiful fellow. Now, whenever he was asked about his aspect, he could just honestly say that it was of the divine rank, and below that. People would rather believe that the spell had ceased to exist than that he was someone noteworthy. Heckle even scream about his accomplishments from the roof, and no one would believe him. Subsequently, no one would ever suspect that he had a true name. Just you wait, fools. One day I'll bet the one laughing. As Sunny was walking away, he heard one of the sleepers talking to Caster. Why didn't you put that lunatic in his place? He has belittled you. After a short pause, Caster answered. His voice sounded low and mellow. Poor kid must have lost his mind in the nightmare. It often happens. He'll most likely die soon, so being kind is the least I can do. The corner of Sunny's mouth twitched. What honest guy? Heck knew that Castor's words were based on a false assumption, but, for some reason, still felt a cold chill running Yufa's spine. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 22-22, Corpse Corner. 1,186 words. Satisfied with his performance, Sunny walked back to the deserted corner of the hall. Heffled people looking at them with mockery, contempt and pity. No one seemed willing to stay close to him. It was just as well. He didn't want to be bothered anyway. Still, weren't their reactions a bit exaggerated? It's not like he was carrying an infectious disease. Well, except for the spell. But it wasn't reality disease, which everyone here should have known already. Finally, he extricated himself from the crowd and reached the corner. For some reason, sleepers were unwilling to approach it. Currently, there was only one girl sitting quietly on the bench. Sunny gave her a look. The quiet girl was delicate, demure and very pretty. Her clothes were tidy and neat. They weren't very expensive, but still rather tasteful. With her pale blonde hair, big blue eyes and exquisite face, she looked like a beautiful porcelain doll. She was subtly breathtaking. However, there was something wrong with her. Sunny frowned, trying to understand what exactly about the girl made him uncomfortable. After a while, he realized that her empty, expressionless stare was reminding him of Mountain King. Startled, Sunny understood that the girl was blind. It took him a couple of seconds to compose himself. What a shame. Abbott disheartened, he carefully sat on the opposite end of the bench. The girl wouldn't have survived the first nightmare if she had been blind prior to entering the spell. Which meant that she lost her sight as a result of the appraisal. It was her flaw. Suddenly, Sunny felt very apprehensive. A cold sensation spread through his chest. And it thought my flaw was bad. No matter what aspect ability the blind girl had received in exchange for her sight, it was effectively a death sentence. A blind person had no chances of surviving in the dream realm, at least not with a dormant core. In some sense, the girl was already dead. She was effectively a walking corpse. Feeling extremely disturbed, Sunny turned away and studied the crowd of sleepers. Now he understood why people were trying to avoid this corner. The girl was surrounded by an invisible but almost palpable aura of death. Sleepers usually weren't very superstitious, but anyone would feel uncomfortable in her company. Armed with this knowledge, Sunny suddenly saw a pattern in how the young people in the hall were grouped. Instinctively, they all tried to stand close to those of their own circumstance. At the far end of the hall, closest to the stage, were one or two small groups. People in these groups were distinct from the rest of sleepers. They were all confident, calm and had an air of readiness. These were the legacies. They were trained for the spell since birth and had the highest chances of survival. Castor especially stood out from the rest. Next to them was a larger number of expensively dressed young people. They were lively and excited, and only a little nervous. They were the scions of rich and high-ranking citizens. Their training was pretty good since such families had ample funds to hire private tutors, even awakened ones. Their chances of survival weren't bad. Then there was the largest part of the crowd, which consisted of kids from middle-class families. They might not have had the privilege of training under awakened tutors, but their education wasn't bad. The government spent a lot of effort to put all the necessary knowledge and skills into the school curriculum, preparing potential sleepers in advance. Some of them might have received additional training in private. To survive, these sleepers would need to put in valiant effort, and also have avid outlook. But it wasn't improbable. Consequently, they were tense and nervous. And lastly, there was Sunny and the blind girl. The corpses. From the point of view of father sleepers in the hall, their chances of survival were close to zero. How charming. This was how the young sleepers had subconsciously divided themselves. The only exception from this rule was the silver-haired girl, who stood alone and apart from everyone, seemingly indifferent to tension and nervousness that permeated the air. She was leaning against a wall with her eyes closed, still listening to music. But regardless of their group and level of training, everyone was already tired of waiting. When will the damn induction ceremony start? Sunny thought, irritated. Asked how answering his thoughts, a tall man in a dark blue uniform appeared on the stage. Not only was Hedel, he was actually almost a jaunt. Sunny even wondered if Demon's mother had sinned with a bear. Of course, it was impossible. Bears had gone extinct long before the spell even appeared. But he saw pictures in a book, and they looked sort of similar. A bear-like nightmare creature, then. The giant man had wide shoulders, an athletic build and a gorgeous brown beard. His eyes were calm and serious. After reaching the center of the stage, he gave sleepers a long look. When his gaze reached the deserted corner, Sunny suddenly felt nervous. I sure hope he doesn't have a telepathic ability. Otherwise, he might separate me from a lime or two on behalf of his mother. The man didn't pay Sunny a lot of attention and returned his gaze to the front rows of the crowd. Finally, he said in a deep, reverberating voice, I am Awakened Rock. Sleepers, welcome to the academy. Everyone listened without making a sound. In less than a month, you will be summoned to the dream realm. Some of you might think that you are well prepared. You are wrong. The spell is merciless and cunning. The moment Awakened begin to think too much of themselves, they die. I've seen countless sleepers like you lose their lives. I've also seen experienced masters lose theirs. Even saints are not assured to survive. Thanks for the encouragement, Sunny thought sarcastically. In the following 4 weeks, we will do everything in our power to increase your chances of survival. You will receive training from the best instructors in the world. However, don't be misled by their fame. In the end, whether you return from the dream realm alive depends only on own person, you. The responsibility to survive is yours, and yours alone. Quote, except for the legacies, sleepers were looking at each other with growing fear in their eyes. Awakened Rock continued, you are not children anymore. It's a shame, because you ought to be. But the spell has decided otherwise. You have been to the first nightmare, so you already know what it's like. Your parents, your teachers and your friends can help you anymore. Haven't had any of those in a long time. While listening to Rock's speech, Sunny couldn't help but feel a little excluded. It was all old news to him. However, he understood the instructor's purpose. He had to make young sleepers afraid, because fear was the only thing that would keep them alive. Finally, the speech got to the important part. Awakened Rock paused, giving kids listening to him a few moments to digest his words. Then, with a short nod, he continued. Now we will talk about the difference between nightmares and the dream realm. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 23-23, Dreams and Nightmares. 1,488 words. That was something Sunny was keenly interested in. Of course, he had agonal knowledge of how things were set inside the spell. But the first nightmare had already shown him that reality was different from how it was portrayed in popular culture in a number of small, but infinitely important ways. He needed to separate truth from the myths. And, of course, it was very advantageous to hear it from the mouth of someone who had actually been to the dream realm. So Sunny was all ears. Awakened Rock began to speak. Most people are aware of what nightmares are, because they have an impact on the real world and their lives. All of you have been warned before entering the first nightmare that, should you perish there, a nightmare creature would be allowed to cross the threshold and enter reality. Yup, that was the reason why Master Jet had to wait patiently by his side, prepared to deal with the monster if it appears. First nightmares are unique, because each of them is individual. That's the only a single creature can appear. However, starting from the second nightmare, things become much more dangerous. These nightmares are not tied to an infected person. Instead, they are born in the dream realm. While the seed of the nightmare is growing, any number of awakened can attempt to conquer it. Hunting down nightmares was the main responsibility of the awakened. Sunny knew that much. Should they all die or fail to find the seed before it matures, Agate will open in the real world, letting through countless monsters. You all know the consequences. Other awakened will be forced to withstand the onslaught on this side, but then there can be massive destruction or losses among the civilian population. Opening gates were something that every person on the planet feared. It was also the second disaster brought upon by the spell after the initial appearance of the nightmare creatures. The main difference was that, in that initial wave, there were only dormant beasts. However, gates had ranks of their own, and any type of creature could potentially step through. Not long before Sunny was born, a rank 5 gate opening left a whole continent uninhabitable. Luckily, high-rank gates were very rare. Awakened Rock's voice grew solemn, so it is not wrong to say that the purpose of the awakened is to enter the dream realm, seek out maturing nightmares and close them before any harm could befall the real world. From this, you can see that the dream realm and the nightmares are connected, but are not one and the same. If nightmares are the destination, then the dream realm is the road. But it is also so much more. Very romantic. Does Awakened Rock have poetic inclinations? Simply put, the dream realm is a world. It is vast, mysterious and mostly unexplored. It is also dead. There is no life out there except for the nightmare creatures, corrupted ecosystems, and now us. But it wasn't always dead. We can tell that once, a long time ago, the dream realm was home to several primitive civilizations. There are a lot of ruins buried in its soil. From what Sunny knew, those lost civilizations were not really primitive, it's just that their development was centered around soul cores and mysticism as opposed to technology. So, basically, miracles and magic. What were their names? How did they fall? No one knew. Maybe they were destroyed by the spell. We don't know if the dream realm exists inside the spell is no FITS illusions, just on an unimaginably larger scale, or if it's real, with the spell only serving as a pathway between two realities. However, we do suspect that the illusions conjured up inside the nightmares are based on its history. They are replicas of past events, somehow reconstructed from the depths of time. So, there might have been aerial slave caravan on that black mountain once, a long time ago. Sunny remembered how time seemed to move in reverse at the beginning of his nightmare. He thought about how things would have ended up without his involvement. Did the nameless temple slave perish in Mountain King's with the rest of the caravan? Somehow, he felt that the nameless slave was not that simple. Otherwise, why would the spell remember him? And what about Hero? Was he able to escape? I wonder. There are 4 main differences between the dream realm and the nightmares. Firstly, it doesn't have a story. There is no predator-mind conflict you are forced to resolve. You can move freely and explore, provided that you have the strength to stay alive in the wilderness. Most people tend to stay close to the human citadels. That is good talk now, Sunny thought, unconvinced. Sure, there were no predetermined conflicts in the dream realm, but with his baited attribute, he was pretty certain to end up in some kind of trouble. So that freedom Awakened Rock had mentioned was relative in his case. Meanwhile, the instructor continued. Secondly, as I have already mentioned, there are no people in the dream realm except for those who came from the real world. There are only monsters. Some of them can mimic human appearance, though, so full of that. Sunny felt cold sweat running down his back. Nightmare creatures mimicking humans. So creepy. Since when was that a thing? Why hasn't he ever heard about it? He stole a glance at the legacies standing in the first row and noticed that they did not show any sign of surprise. So, they knew. Thirdly, unlike the first nightmare, no nightmare creatures will appear in the real world if you die in the dream realm. It may sound cruel, but that's a good thing. Awakened forces are already spread thin. If we had to monitor every sleeper, we wouldn't have resources to handle more important matters. Considering that each sleeper could spend weeks, sometimes even months in the dream realm, there was ruthless logic in that statement. And lastly, and most importantly, unlike nightmares, which are bound by the rules of fairness, there is no limit to what kind of creature you can meet in the dream realm. During its trials, the spell went pit a dormant human against an opponent many ranks above them. Oriali, Sunny sneered. However, he was forced to agree with Awakened Rock. Even though both Hero and Mountain King were way out of his league, they were still just one rank above him. But in the dream realm, no such restrictions exist. Theoretically, you can stumble upon an unholy titan and die before even realizing what happened. So be careful and stick to the regions with enemies on par with your own rank. It's not an ironclad guarantee, but at least there will be less of a chance of you biting off more than you can chew. Sticking to a region populated by nightmare creatures below his rank was even better. That was exactly what Sunny was planning to do. Awakened Rock paused for a few moments, studying the faces of sleepers in front of him. Then headed, when the solstice comes, you will bedrun into the dream realm. The exact location of where you will appear can be predicted in advance, but there is a high chance that many of you will find yourselves in close proximity to each other. Band together and proceed to the nearest human citadel. Each citadel is built around a gateway. Once you reach it, you will be able to return. Gateways were special portals that served as exit points from the dream realm. Once sleepers reached such a portal, they would be able to escape back to reality and become awakened. Their core would evolve, and they would also receive a second aspect ability. After that, they would return to the dream realm each time they fall asleep. If you can locate or are unable to reach the nearest human citadel, search for an unclimbed gateway. It will usually be inside or near the most prominent landmark of the region. Work together to defeat its guardians and come back alive. Give them a heavy look. That is all for today. Next, follow the instructions sent to your communicators to find your assigned dormitory. Once settled, you may proceed to the cafeteria for some late supper. There will be a round of interviews after that. Prepare your suggested curriculums. Get a good night's rest. Your training starts tomorrow. With that, give them a short nod and left. Sunny sighed. Can be predicted in advance. With his luck, he would either drop right in the middle of a prosperous human citadel and immediately roll into a gateway, or appear in some region of the dream realm so remote and deadly that no one had ever heard about it or returned from it alive. Let's shop for the former. Since Heck couldn't do anything about it, Sunny wasn't very worried. There was something much more important on his mind. What, exactly, do they serve here for supper? Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 24-24. Moving up in the world. 1,339 words. Everything having Toto with sleepers was situated in the same building. Sunny followed the instructions sent Tohi's communicator and quickly found the dormitories, which were situated on one of the lowest levels. Tohi's surprise, he actually got a whole room to himself. It had a bed with a soft mattress, a dresser, and even a separate bathroom. The materials were new and aesthetically pleasing, the air crisp and sterile. It was warm inside, and the outer wall was equipped with a hidden screen that seamlessly imitated a wide window, opening to a picturesque vista of Fasnoe Park. There were even several sets of clothes with the Academy emblem provided to him for free. How extravagant, Sunny thought, a little stunned. Rationally, he understood that such an arrangement was not really luxurious. However, Tohim, who grew up wandering the outskirts, this room was like a palace. He scratched his head. Looks like, I've made it. Sunny glanced around, then winked at the shadow and smiled. I guess we're moving up in the world, huh? The shadow didn't respond, apparently not very impressed. Perhaps it didn't care about such things. Right, what would a stupid shadow know? Sunny changed into new clothes and studied himself in the mirror. Then, remembering something, he summoned the runes. He finally had time to study the Puppeteer's Shroud. Memory, Puppeteer's Shroud, Memory Rank, Awakened, Memory Type, Armor, Memory Description. A worm of doubt once found its way into a righteous king's heart. With time, the king was devoured from inside and became its puppet. A lifetime later, the puppeteer worm escaped from the king's dead body, leaving behind a cocoon of black silk. No one knows where it went. However, once people dared to approach the silent castle, they found the silk among the mountain's gnawed bones and fashioned it into an armor. Sunny made a sour face. That is not that terrifying. Yeah, I'm not creeped out at all. Come to think of it, the first creature he killed was called a larva. If you were to assume that Mountain King was amateur puppeteer worm, and already adorant, then what the hell would it transform into after becoming Ameth? No, it's better not to think about it. With a sigh, he summoned the Puppeteer's Shroud. Thin black threads immediately appeared around his body and wrapped it into a set of armor. It was made of dark gray, soft fabric with several elements, such as bracers and shoulder guards, fashioned out of black, lusterless leather. The armor was light, understated and did not restrain his movements at all. It also made no sound when he moved. Perfect equipment for someone who likes to lurk in the shadows. Sunny smiled. Heck knew that this armor would better to pierce for any creature below the awakened rank, which gave him a great advantage in dealing with all dormant monsters. He also felt a sort of strange, faint calmness while wearing it. A worm of doubt. Does it have enhanced protection against mental attacks? Somehow, he was sure of it. A great trophy. He wouldn't expect anything less from the memory of a powerful tyrant. The only problem was that the Puppeteer's Shroud was obviously not meant to be worn on top of a full set of clothes. Quite satisfied, Sunny dismissed it and left his room, heading for the cafeteria. Not bad, he thought, recalling all the rewards he had received during and after the first nightmare. The supper turned out Toby's lavish as dormitory. Sunny's Ishto-test real meat finally came true. Not only was it freely available to sleepers, there wasn't even a limit to the amount each of them could eat. More than that, there were rice, bread, various side dishes, sauces, fresh vegetables, fruits, and all kinds of delicious beverages. Extravagant, Sunny thought, steering clear of the coffee. After building a small mountain of food on his plate, he found an empty seat and, for a while, forgot about the world's existence. As juicy, textured, perfectly seasoned meat filled his mouth, Sunny's vision suddenly was full of stars. He had to hold back an exhilarated moan. And to think, he could have lived like that for a whole year. Damn spell, why didn't you infect me a few months ago? He concentrated on the food, decimating the whole plate in a time. Satiated and more than a little gorged, Sunny longingly looked back and thought about getting another serving. But it was already time for his appointment with the academy personnel. Full of regret, he stood up and left the cafeteria. Soon, he found himself in an Asmal office, sitting across from an administrative worker. The worker was very friendly, and started the interview right away. Just like Master Jet had warned him, Sunny was offered psychological counseling again. Remembering her advice, he refused, and the interview smoothly switched to questions about his aspect. He didn't want to give up information about his abilities, but also knew that he had to tell the worker something. Luckily, the questions were worded in a way to put sleepers at ease. Asic, most of them started with nice and polite preambles like, would you like to tell me, or, if you're willing to share, which gave Sunny an opportunity to give neutral answers. Would you mind telling me about the type of aspect ability you received, as in combat, sorcery, utility? Headed mind, but had to be careful. I'm not sure, I haven't had time to understand it well. That's alright, are you able to directly deal damage with your ability? I guess not. Earlier, I wasn't even able to harm a towel. Things went on like that. In the end, Sunny shared just enough information to create an impression that his aspect was weak, harmless and most likely having something to do with utility. After that, he returned to his room, undressed, and went to sleep. Sunny thought that falling asleep for the first time after the nightmare would be weird, but in fact, it was surprisingly easy. lying on a soft mattress, with his skin against clean bedsheets and a fluffy pillow under his head, has slept like a baby. Early in the morning, Sunny washed up in his private bathroom and, bursting with energy, hurried to get breakfast in a happy mood. The cafeteria was avid crowded. After filling his plate with all kinds of delicious stuff, he quickly realized that the only place he could sit was near the blind girl from yesterday. Her table was empty, since no one wanted Toby close to her. Sunny grimaced. It seemed that the two of them were doomed to be outcasts together for the remaining 4 weeks. He also felt uncomfortable in the company of someone who was practically a dead person, but there wasn't much of a choice. Losing his good mood, he sat at the blind girl's table and gave a precursory nod to the social worker who was helping her get around. After that, he tried to pretend that they didn't exist and concentrated on his food. However, before he could finish, a sudden commotion drew his attention. What is going on? He looked up and noticed that a lot of sleepers were gathered around the large screen hanging on the wall of the cafeteria, their faces filled with excitement and awe. On the screen, a list of names was displayed, ranking the new batch of sleepers from weakest to strongest, most likely deduced from the results of the interviews. Not particularly interested, he quickly found his own name near the bottom of the list. The only sleeper who the academy judged Toby less likely to succeed than him was the blind girl. Turns out, her name was Kasia, but the commotion was a bit too loud to be just the result of the ranking. Curious, he moved his gaze up. The sleepers were restless. How can this be? I'm not seeing things, right? What kind of a monster is she? Castor was placed in second place, and right above him, the portrait of the silver-haired girl could be clearly seen. To the right of it, 2 simple lines of text were displayed. Name, Neffy's, true name, changing star, share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave, Chapter 25-25, Wilderness Survival. 1,424 words. So, the silver-haired girl, Neffy's, also received a true name in her first nightmare. To get his own, Sunny had to deal with Hero and Mountain King while possessing a completely useless aspect, an impossible feat that seemed to have pleased the spell very much. I wonder how she had gotten hers. Sleepers in the cafeteria were struck dumb by the revelation of this achievement. They were staring at the screen with astonishment, fear and admiration. Listening to their excited whispers, Sunny felt a childish desire to scream, me too. I have one too, but, of course, he kept quiet. Looking around, he noticed Castor's gaze fixed on the screen. There was a strange, somber expression on the humorous young man's face. But the weird thing about it was that, as far as Sunny could tell, Castor wasn't looking at the line of text containing the true name. Instead, he was staring at the line of text that read, Neffy's, asked how the girl's actual name held more meaning to him than the one given by the spell. Interesting. Do they know each other? Why would a lofty legacy know someone who came to the academy in a police-issued tracksuit? And speaking of Neffy's, where was she? Sunny glanced around the cafeteria and quickly noticed the silver-haired girl, who was sitting quietly in a corner with a cup of coffee in her hands. She wasn't paying a lot of attention to the commotion, seemingly immersed in her thoughts. Her gray eyes were serious and distant. A sleeper with a true name. That's impossible. It's technically possible. Smile of Heaven received her true name in the first nightmare, I think. But yeah, I'm doubtful. Maybe she lied in the interview. Are you stupid? If it was that easy to deceive the administrators, the crazy pervert from yesterday would have been in the first place instead. Sunny's face twitched. Crazy pervert. Huh, well, why didn't we just ask her? Suddenly, there was a deafening silence in the cafeteria. Following the suggestion, sleepers stopped talking and turned around, staring at Neffys. However, no one seemed to have the courage to approach her first. Finally sensing something, she raised her eyes and looked at them with surprise. What? Even the blind girl, Kasia, turned in the direction of her voice. After a couple of moments, Castor suddenly walked over and made a small bow. Lady Neffys, I am Castor from the Hanli clan. I see that your trial went well. Lady, why is Head dressing her that way? And he had to introduce himself, so, they didn't know each other. Interesting. Neffys seemed to be a little bit perplexed by the question. After thinking for a while, she smiled brightly and shrugged. Itis but itis. Castor awkwardly returned the smile. I see. I am very glad that you returned unharmed. Not that I doubted your abilities. Neffys nodded. Thank you. After that, she returned to her coffee, indicating that the conversation was over or simply oblivious to everyone's attention. Sunny sighed. How mysterious. There were a lot of thoughts on his mind. However, none of them could distract him from the most important thing, breakfast. A few seconds later, he had forgotten all about the awkward dynamic between Castor and Neffys and was happily shoveling down his food. The wilderness survival classroom was spacious, tastefully decorated, and completely empty. Sunny even thought that he was mistaken, but then spotted a gloomy instructor sitting behind a wide wooden desk. Noticing him, the instructor perked up. Come in, young man. He was a lively old man with messy gray hair, absent-minded eyes and a pair of bushy eyebrows that seemed to jump around one their own. I'm Awaken Julius. You can call me Teacher Julius. Sit down, sit down. What is your name? Sunny obediently sat down. It's Sunless. Julius raised his eyebrows. What Animinus name? But that is good, very good. After all, we have to deal with a lot of ominous things. Sunny carefully looked around. I'm sorry, teacher. Did I come too early? No, you're right on time. Are other students late? The instructor grunted with incredible contempt. No one else is coming. Those brutes are only interested in swinging their fists and swords around. Very few are smart like you and know the true value of knowledge. Oh, so it was that unpopular. Sunny inwardly sighed, hoping that he wouldn't regret the decision to abandon combat training in favor of this course. Say, young man, why did you choose wilderness survival, of all things? There was no point in hitting the true reason. Not that Sunny would have been able to anyway. The awakened that monitored Mettering the first nightmare, Master Jet, had advised May to study Eat above all things. Avery wise advice. That master truly knows what is important. Wait, did you say Jet? His eyes widened. Soul Reaper Jet, that murderous savage. Who would have thought that a barbarian like her would know the value of intricate knowledge? Soul Reaper. Sunny's curiosity was piqued. Teacher, do you know Master Jet? Julius carefully looked behind his back before answering. Who doesn't know the Soul Reaper? She might not be the most powerful awakened out there, but she is certainly one of the most feared. That's because her aspect abilities disregard flesh and target soul cores directly. Which means that no amount of armor, damage resistance and physical protection can stop them. Helene forward, the only good thing is that she's young and not likely to become a saint anytime soon, or even ever. Yes, luckily, there's a very low probability that she'll ever advance. Sunny blinked. Why? Julius looked at them asked how trying to comprehend how someone could best warrant. Because of her problematic personality, of course. Who would want to help a psychopathic killer become a saint? You need a team of outstanding companions and a lot of support to attempt conquering the third nightmare. Soul Reaper Jet isn't. Wait. Suddenly, Julius frowned and leaned back. Why am I gossiping with you? You're too young to talk now such things. More than that, it's not in my character to badmouth others behind their backs. I would beg to differ, Sunny thought sarcastically, but didn't say anything out loud. Already got a lot of juicy information out of teacher Julius. Maybe choosing wilderness survival was the right choice after all. Let's jay back to your curriculum. What other courses are you taking? Sunny sighed. None. For the next 4 weeks, all fully concentrated on wilderness survival. Julius stared at them for a whole minute, an expression of utter astonishment written clearly on his face. Then, slowly, an excited gleam appeared in his eyes. Finally, Hegrin, wonderful, this ice wonderful, you're such an astute young man, didn't you worry, in 4 whole weeks, I will make you immortal. Sunny's lessons with teacher Julius started pleasantly and without much tension, but just an hour later, he felt like his head was ready to explode. There was so much new information, and all of it was so strange and counterintuitive for someone who had never left the walled-off, sheltered confines of the city. From time to time, Julius gaped at Sunny's lack of knowledge and relevant experience. However, he had a good attitude and an endless enthusiasm for teaching. Whenever Sunny stumbled, he would patiently slow down and allow his student to catch up. The curriculum that Julius planned out was practically insane. There was an endless amount of theoretical knowledge to learn, practical lessons both in virtual reality and the real world, numerous subjects and weird things to study. There were even several lessons dedicated exclusively to learning the basics of several dead languages of the dream realm. Why would a need to learn new languages? Sunny thought with self-pity. The spell automatically translates everything. But Julius wasn't compromising. The spell is not a translator. Do you think it has the time to express the intricacies of human speech? Let's say you're seeking shelter in Aruan and find an inscription that reads, certain death ahead. There are 30 words for death in the rune language. Just by knowing the runes, you'll be able to deduce what kind of danger there is. The first day, they studied until the sun was about to set. Only then did Julius decide to let Sunny go. Mentally exhausted and lamenting the fact that he had to miss lunch and dinner, Sunny decided to gently remind his teacher about the importance of food for maintaining high levels of concentration tomorrow. After returning to his room, he fell on a chair and stared blankly into the distance for a while. Then, asked how remembering something, Sunny turned to his shadow. Right, he had a lot to accomplish before supper. He observed the shadow for a few seconds and then grinned. Let's see what you can really do. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 26-26, Changing Star. 1,579 words. Sunny was pretty sure that his shadow was capable of much more than just being a silent follower. After all, the spell had described it as being an invaluable helper. It was now up to him to find out how exactly shadow control could be of help. As in many other matters having Toto with aspects, there was a certain level of instinctual understanding buried deep inside his subconscious. This understanding was either given to him by the spell or was something innate to every awakened. Sunny just had to sense the subconscious knowledge and learn how to put it into practice. Once again, he concentrated on sensing his body and spirit, then commanded the shadow to perform a series of simple motions. With each of them, he was growing more and more familiar with the feeling of controlling the shadow. Pretty soon, it was as natural to him as breathing and walking. The shadow felt like a part of his body. Satisfied with this initial result, Sunny carefully gave it a new command. Without pause, the shadow separated itself from the soles of his shoes, walked to the other end of the room and turned around, staring at them in slightly mocking silence. Sunny was left without a shadow. This is not scientific at all, he thought with an amused smile. Science never really applied to anything having Toto with the spell, after all. As Shadow walked away, he felt every weird split happening in his mind. It was like his perception had separated into two distinct sources. One was his body, the other, his shadow. With Abbott off-treeing, he managed to focus on the second source. Instantly, his vision blurred. Whoa, Sunny blurted, surprised. Whoa, the shadow heard from the other end of the room. Sunny blinked. In his mind, there now existed two pictures. One was of his room's door, with an indifferent shadow standing in front of it. The other was of a pale young man sitting on a chair, wide-eyed and bewildered. That's me. He raised an arm and waved it in the air. Simultaneously, the pale young man raised and waved his. I can perceive the world through my shadow. He sat for a while, thinking. An ability like that opened up a lot of possibilities. With his Child of Shadows attribute allowing him to see and move stealthily in the darkness and shadow control allowing him to send out a sneaky shadow as a scout, he was pretty much a perfect spy. Aspie was someone who gathered information without exposing themselves to a lot of risk. A role like that suited Sunny's task very much. Of course, spies were also able to strike from the shadows with deadly precision. Armed with information, they were masterful ambushers. With the prior knowledge of the opponent's weaknesses, their attacks were surgical and lethal. But any direct confrontation would mean putting himself in danger, so Sunny wasn't very keen on becoming an assassin. After all, his aspect still lacked the means of directly enhancing his combat performance. Shall we test it? He looked at the shadow and gave it a comment. With an exaggerated sigh, the shadow bent down and nimbly slid under the door. Instantly, he could see both the room and the hallway outside. Sunny closed his eyes to focus on the picture projected from the shadow. Moving stealthily from one shadow to another, it glided down the hallway. With a bit of timing and consideration, his scout was practically invisible. Sunny passed by a couple of sleepers and listened in on their conversation. Not finding it very interesting, he continued forward. Finally, the shadow stopped at a corner. Toit's left were the elevators, Toit's right, the way to the girls' dormitory. All sorts of provocative images immediately entered Sunny's head. Oh me, he thought, blushing. Yes, with this ability, it was also very easy to fall into utter depravity. But no, he Heck couldn't do it, not because of some high moral principles. It's just that, with his reputation of a pervert, the chances of being asked if I had done something unbecoming were pretty high. So he needed the ability to honestly answer, no. So, I probably shouldn't. Right, of course you're right. Didn't even think about it. Back in his room, Sunny sighed with a lot of regret. Then he directed his scout to hide in the shadow of a passing sleeper and followed him to the elevators. Some time later, Sunny's shadow was hiding in a corner of a large dojo. He was observing his fellow sleepers who, under the guidance of Instructor Rock, were going through the motions of the introductory combat class. Today was mainly dedicated to testing their general competency and abilities. After that, the sleepers were going to be separated into groups based on their level, such as novice, advanced or expert, as well as their weapon of choice. Some would be assigned a personal tutor or paired together. Currently, sleepers were taking turns delivering their strongest punches to a wide plate attached to a special measuring machine. After each strike, the machine would display a number corresponding to the sleeper's physical strength. In theory, a machine like that was not hard to build. However, considering that many of sleepers had combat-oriented aspects that enhanced their might in a variety of ways, it was actually a marvel of engineering and durability. Their technique and training also affected the final result. Most people were getting numbers ranging from 10 to 14. It was considered a good result, something that only the most athletic people could reach. However, a lot of sleepers, obviously those with enhancing aspects, were able to achieve a score of 15 or even 16. I would probably get 10 or 11, Sunny thought, feeling a little bored. Then he suddenly perked up, noticing that it was turn for Neffys, the highest-rated sleeper of their batch, to strike the plate. The slender girl approached the machine and, without much preparation, delivered a sudden, crushing blow. Sunny wasn't very well versed in martial arts, but even he was impressed by the flawless economy and speed of her execution. She had a lot of training. Neffys was becoming more and more intriguing. What is her actual background? After a short pause, the machine displayed the result, 16. Sunny felt a bit disappointed. Not that impressive. I was expecting more. She was the proud bearer of a true name, after all. After that, only Castor remained. This time, Sunny couldn't even see the flying fist. It was just too fast. The machine trembled and took more time calculating. Finally, 2 numbers appeared. 21. Everyone gaped at the display, stunned. More than a few admiring looks were thrown at Castor, who simply bowed and took a step back. Instructor Rock smiled. Not bad. Now, we will move to sparring and evaluate your general level of training. I need 2 volunteers to begin. Neffys was the first to step forward and walk to the center of the ring. A couple of seconds later, a tall and extremely muscular sleeper followed and faced her. The rules are simple. Make your opponent's back touch the floor or throw them out of the ring. Use whatever abilities and techniques you find appropriate. Oh, the show is starting. Watching sleepers fight each other was not only entertaining, but could also provide Sunny with knowledge of their powers. Back in the room, he leaned forward and rested his chin on his palms. Go Neffys. The tall guy attacked without wasting any time. His muscles bulged, threatening to tear the soft fabric of his white dobok. He advanced like an unstoppable mountain, sending a vicious kick flying. A second later, he was lying on the floor with a dumbstruck look on his face. Neffys didn't even change her stance. Instructor Rock gave her a cheerful look and grinned. Next, what followed could only be described as Amasaker. One after another, Neffys managed to defeat almost every single sleeper present in the dojo. She didn't seem to be faster or stronger than them, but each time someone entered the ring to fight her, they would inevitably end up beaten and thrown to the ground. Sunny watched the process with a growing sense of amusement. However, at some point, even he felt a bit funnies. Neffys moved with the calm precision of a battle machine. Her technique was clean, graceful and ruthless. No matter what type of attack was thrown at her, she was able to either predict or instantly react to it, then deflect and turn it against the attacker with the minimum amount of effort. It didn't matter whether her opponent was poor, rich or a legacy. Everyone would end up dealt with in a matter of seconds. What is more, through the whole process, the composed expression on her face didn't even change once. It was like Neffys was made out of metal. Is she even human? Sunny thought, suddenly apprehensive. What was he going to do if this changing star were to end up Pasha's enemy? The best course of action would be torn away. Or better yet, try not to antagonize her, to begin with. After all, the sun was also a star, and shadows didn't mix well with sunlight. Finally, Castor was the last one remaining, once again. However, he didn't seem to be perturbed by the miserable failure of every other sleeper. With a soft smile on his lips, the young man stepped into the ring. Castor and Neffys faced each other. Their eyes locked for a few seconds, and then Castor slightly bowed. Lady Neffys, please excuse mine advance. What is she going to? A moment later, Sunny opened his eyes in shock. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 27-27, Measure of Power. 1,632 words. It seemed like Castor suddenly ceased to exist. However, it was only an illusion. The truth was that he was just moving so fast that the human eye wasn't able to keep up with his movements. If it wasn't for the special properties of shadow sight, Sunny wouldn't have been able to perceive anything either. Even then, he only noticed a hazy blur streaking through the air. In a fraction of a second, Castor covered the distance between him and Neffys and delivered a devastating blow. However, despite his astonishing speed, she somehow managed to react in time, slightly turning her body to deflect the strike. But it still wasn't enough. Although Neffys had managed to avoid being hit squarely in her center of gravity, Castor's fist ended up connecting with her shoulder, sending the girl into a spin. Not wasting any time, Castor disappeared again. His plan was very simple. While Neffys was still under the impression that the enemy was in front of her, he was going to use his unnatural swiftness to circle around and attack from the back. The young man appeared behind the oblivious girl, ready to finish the fight with one decisive strike. Just as planned, she seemed to be preparing to attack in the direction he had been seen just a split second ago. Gratified, Castor shifted his weight, putting needle into his fist. However, at the last moment, Neffys suddenly changed her stance and threw her elbow back with frightening force. Castor's eye widened. It was all a feint, and now that he had committed toe strike, there was no simple way to stop. No matter how fast he was still subject to the laws of inertia. The elbow was approaching his face with a profound feeling of inevitability. And yet, Castor still managed to avoid it, even if just by a hair's breadth. His speed advantage was just too big. Heaven proceeded to trip and push Neffys, sending her flying to the ground. However, just before she was about to hit the mats, the young man carefully grabbed the collar off her dobok and gently pulled, slowing down the fall and allowing Neffys to land on the floor without any impact. Lying on her back, the girl blinked a couple of times and looked up at them. The whole altercation lasted no more than 2 seconds. Back in his room, Sunny opened his eyes in shock. So that's on ascended aspect. That's cheating. A sleeper had no business being that fast. The powers bestowed upon them by the spell were supposed to bind their infancy. But, Castor was a legacy, after all. Who knew how many soul shards were fed to him prior to enrolling into the academy? Back in the dojo, Instructor Rock grunted and gave Castor an id. Neffy slowly rose to her feet. The rest of the sleepers were gawking at the young man with reverence, whispering among each other in hushed tones. It seemed that his performance left them with a deep impression. However, Castor himself wasn't very elated. He glanced at Neffys with an unreadable expression. That was because, unlike the rest of them, he came to a certain realization. The truth of the matter was known only to him, Neffys, Instructor Rock, and Sunny, who was very observant and quickly picked upon sick things. The thing that sleepers failed to notice was that Neffys did not use her aspect ability when facing Castor. In fact, she had not used it at any point during today's sting. No one even knew what her ability was. And yet, despite his powerful aspect, Castor barely managed to clutch a victory against her. What a monster, Sunny thought, full of funnies. The shadow hiding in the corner of the dojo seemed to agree with him wholeheartedly. After that, the introductory combat class was over. Sore from the beating they received, sleepers headed for the showers. Sunny waited for Abbott and then directed his shadow to sneak into the boys' locker room. He wasn't very interested in watching a bunch of teenagers changing clothes, but there was a slight possibility that Castor would either comment on his duel with Neffys or answer some questions about his incredible aspect ability. Just as Shahad expected, the young man was surrounded by a group of newly converted fans. They were congratulating him on his victory, full of iteration and excitement. However, Castor himself seemed to be in a bad mood. His expression was somber, and there was a grim heaviness in his eyes. In fact, his face grew darker with each praise he received. Castor, that was incredible. Your aspect is overpowered, am I right? That Neffys girl stood no chance at all. True name, who needs that? She is just a wannabe. Finally, Castor raised his head and pierced the last boy who had spoken with a cold look. That boy, just like him, was one of the few legacies in their batch of sleepers. He frowned, surprised by Castor's reaction. What is it? Castor gritted his teeth. I might have expected such behavior from them, but you should know better. The other legacy raised an eyebrow. Why, there's something special about that peasant girl. Castor Shay's widened. Peasant girl. Do you really not know who she is? No, Sunny thought impatiently. So just get to it and say it out loud. Luckily, the arrogant sleeper had the same sentiment. Castor opened his mouth several times, asked how not sure what to say. Finally, he shook his head and answered. She is Neffys of the Immortal Flame clan. As soon as said that, the arrogant legacy became deathly pale. Not paying him any attention, Castor continued. I trust that I didn't need to tell you about her grandfather. Her parents were Smile of Heaven and Broken Sword. In his room, Sunny almost fell from the chair. Even Heck knew who Immortal Flame and Broken Sword were. The former was the first human to conquer the second nightmare and become a master. The latter, the first one to conquer the third nightmare and become a saint. They, as well as their companions, were among the most famous heroes of the human race, someone who had managed to change history with their own 2 hands. If what Castor said was true, then Neffys wasn't just an aristocrat, she was royalty. No wonder Head dressed her as lady. Why didn't he just call her princess instead? But that didn't make any sense. Echoing his thoughts, the pale-faced sleeper asked in trembling voice. Then why is she so? Castor sighed. Because they're all dead. The Immortal Flame clan is long gone. For a few moments, the locker room was completely silent. Castor looked down. She is the only one left. Late at night, when everyone was already asleep, Sunny furtively entered the dojo. Looking around, he made sure that no one was there and then curiously approached the ring where Neffys and others had been tested earlier. He stopped at the center of the ring and stood there for a while, remembering how she had dealt with dozens of sleepers of their batch before being defeated by Castor. Monsters, both of them are monsters. He mumbled, bitter and disheartened. Shaking his head, Sunny left the ring and then he looked at the shadow. Do you agree? The shadow hesitated for a few seconds, then stuck out its chest and crossed its arms, trying to appear cocky, disdainful and unperturbed. However, its act wasn't very convincing. Yeah, you're right, exactly. What is the big deal anyway? Both Immortal Flame and Broken Sword, Neffys' father and grandfather, were as monstrous in terms of power as someone can get. But they still failed to protect their family from being eviscerated. So, power wasn't that important in the end. Even royalty was not saved from the cruelty of the world. Sunny sighed and proceeded to the measuring machine. Making a fist, Hes1 delivered his best punch. The machine hummed for a few seconds and then displayed a single number. 9. Oh, come on, it is Ervaten, at least. Feeling very indignant, Hes struck the plate again, almost hurting his fingers. However, the result was the same. Damn it, Sunny paced for Abbott, trying to control his anger. It seems he was destined to be weakling. After all, the force of the strike depended on mass and acceleration. Acceleration could be improved with technique and exercise, but mass was something he had little control of. He was already done growing, and his height was not going to drastically increase in the future. No matter how hard Sunny trained, he was always going to be lightweight. How is this fair? Suddenly filled with resentment, he punched the plate again, putting all of his frustration into this one strike. At that moment, a strange instinct suddenly awakened in Sunny's mind. Following the command of this instinct, his shadow flowed up and wrapped itself around his hand, sticking to it like a black glove. In the next moment, the punch connected. The machine trembled from the force of the strike. Sunny yelped in pain and took a step back, cradling his bruised fist. After a while, the result was displayed. However, it wasn't Tunin anymore. It wasn't Evan. It was 18. He looked at the displayed number for a long time, expressionless. Then, a wide grin slowly appeared on Sunny's face. I see. So that why, of course. He clenched his fist again, looking down at the black, shadowy glove. Ah, what an invaluable helper indeed. Now we're talking. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 28 to 28. Training montage. 1,193 words. Days flew by. Sunny only had 4 weeks to prepare himself for the journey into the dream realm, so there wasn't even a minute to spare. He was relentless, pushing his body and mind to the limits in an attempt to absorb as much knowledge and skills as possible in that short amount of time. In the day, he studied with teacher Julius, slowly learning how to survive and take care of himself in the absence of civilization. Their lessons ranged from comparatively simple, like various ways to produce fire, to much more obscure and esoteric, like celestial navigation. What was so hard about celestial navigation? Well, as it turned out, the dream realm was not consistent in terms of star geography. Different regions had different stars and constellations, as well as a different number of moons. While the sun seemed to be the same, its behavior was highly unpredictable. Still, with sufficient knowledge, one could find ways to study the skies and subsequently navigate themselves. Most of these lessons were, supposedly, already included in the various school curriculums and known to the majority of sleepers. However, learning something from a textbook and learning the same thing from an actual awakened were two completely different matters. Teacher Julius had a habit of going much more in-depth when explaining his subject. Thanks to this time-consuming habit of his, Sunny not only learned about the what, but also often gained glimpses into the why. This nascent understanding of the underlying principles of the dream realm environments gave him the ability to face any situation with at least some measure of readiness. Even the lessons in dead languages, which Sunny had initially judged to be useless, turned out to be much more interesting than he could ever imagine. This was, in large part, because it concerned the spell itself. After all, the spell communicated with humans in one of those dead languages. By knowing the language, he was able to understand its various remarks and descriptions better. The simplest example of this was Neffy's and her true name, Changing Star. While technically correct, this translation failed to properly convey the exact meaning. By understanding the grammatical structure of the rune language, it was easy to extrapolate and see that the more correct translation would have been, Star of Change. More than that, there were different runes for change, each with its own connotation. Depending on what exact rune was used to relay the meaning of the name, it could also mean, ruinous star, or, star of misfortune. Asmal change in wording and connotation could mean a world of difference in real life. Sunny, who had never seriously studied before, found the process of acquiring vast amounts of the oracle knowledge strange, numbing and exhausting. However, in essence, it was also exhilarating. After all, knowledge was something that only the privileged had access to. It was also this authority over knowledge that kept them in the position of power, creating a vicious circle of fine quality. The poor had no opportunity to study, and without the advantage of good education, they had no way to stop being poor. The weirdest part about all of this was that Sunny was now one of those privileged people. More than that, he was at the pinnacle of social hierarchy. Not only had he gained access to an unlimited amount of knowledge, but even his basic needs like food and shelter were also taken care of by the government, allowing him to fully focus on the single goal of developing himself as unawakened. This sudden transformation would have sent him into a whirlpool of philosophical reflection if he had any time to spare. But he didn't, because teacher Julius also insisted on holding practical lessons every other day. Even if some of them had to be done in virtual reality simulations, he insisted on using the full immersion stations with enhanced physical feedback. As a result, Sunny was bone-tired and utterly exhausted. The good thing was that with such amount of exercise, coupled with his newly reforged body, Sunny had never been in better shape. Even without combat training, he could feel his strength, stamina and agility improving by leaps and bounds. Basically, the peculiar rebirth he had experienced after completing the first nightmare had enhanced the innate potential of his body, bringing it to the peak of the human condition. However, it was up to him to realize that potential with sweat, effort and a lot of hard work. Practical application of wilderness survival techniques provided him with the opportunity to do so. And asked how this wasn't enough, Sunny secretly collected information about other sleepers and practiced shadow control every night. His shadow was independent enough to be sent on scouting missions without his direct control. It would sneak here and there, listening in on the conversations and observing different classes where sleepers had to demonstrate their aspect abilities. Then, after Sunny had finished his supper and returned to his room, it would come back and share everything it had heard and seen during the day. The only problem with this arrangement was that the shadow, despite its outward snarkiness, turned out to be naive. It didn't quite understand how the human world worked, and ASIC often failed to distinguish between useful information and meaningless chatter. So, most of the time, Sunny would receive nothing of value or juicy gossip instead of important secrets. This I show Hellion that in the sleeper center, romance was in the air. After all, there were 800 beautiful young people locked underground in close proximity to each other, with the added spice of a deathly threat hanging above their heads. Many felt that life was short and it was their time to seize the day. Passion bloomed in the shadow of approaching danger. Sunny was excluded from this whole side of the thing, of course. Firstly, he had already positioned himself to be perceived as an unlikable lunatic. Secondly, he simply had no time for anything except for his lessons and training. And lastly, he was wary of getting too close to anybody, afraid that a situation would arise where he would have no choice but to divulge his true name. Apart from gathering information and slowly learning about the scope and details of various aspect abilities, and, to a lesser extent, flaws, he was also experimenting with shadow control. The results were very promising. He quickly found out that his shadow was able to enhance various objects and not only his body. If it trapped itself around a weapon, the weapon struck harder and delivered more damage. If it was applied to armor, the armor would become sturdier and harder to break. The enhancement was rather substantial, too. It was roughly twice as much as initial value. All in all, this ability, if used correctly, could make him a powerhouse among the sleepers. Many combat aspects could deliver more speed or damage, many could provide more defense and protection, but none were as well-rounded and versatile as Shadow Slave. With the added utility of Shadow Sight, Shadow Step and Shadow Scout, it was truly incredible. Just like that, day after day passed, slowly turning into weeks. Before Sunny even knew it, the winter solstice was already here. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave, Chapter 29 to 29, The Last Day on Earth. 1,371 words. One day of the winter solstice, Sunny woke up feeling tired and drowsy. No matter how much he tried to shake off this listlessness, it wouldn't go away. In the end, he just stayed in the bed for a while, wrapping himself in a blanket. He was already familiar with this feeling of never-ending, ensnaring sleepiness. It was the same in the days before his first nightmare. It was also quite similar to what he had experienced while slowly dying of hypothermia on the slopes of the Black Mountain. Remembering the cold embrace of approaching death, Sunny couldn't help but shiver. This was his last day on Earth, at least for a while. By nightfall, the spell was going to take him away once again, this time to challenge the vast expanse of the dream realm. What was he going to face in that ruined magical world? Would luck be on his side this time, or would there be another disaster? There was no point in guessing. He had already done everything in his power to prepare for the inevitable. He studied hard, trained hard, and kept his secret safe. His aspect was better than most, and his will to survive was long tempered by the harsh reality of the outskirts and the even harsher ordeal of the first nightmare. All in all, he was ready. With ASIGH, Sunny got out of bed and went along with his morning routine. If this was going to be his last hot shower in a long while, he was going to really enjoy it. If it was going to be his last scrumptious breakfast for the time being. Actually, he had no appetite. The cafeteria was full of sleepers, but no one was talking. Everybody was in low spirits and seemed to be uncharacteristically introspective. There was unusual laughter or boisterous conversations, only the legacies remained calm and collected. However, even they kept to themselves. Sunny thought about the last time he was preparing to enter the spell and, with a bit of trepidation, approached the coffee machine. During his stay in the academy, he had long discovered that a lot of people were in a habit of adding sugar and milk to their coffee. So, on this auspicious day, he decided to give it another try. After all, it was nice to have a tradition. A few minutes later, he had taken his usual seat near Kasia, the blind girl. Despite their compulsory closeness, they had not talked to each other even once, just like two strangers forced to share the same space by circumstances beyond their control. Sunny did not see a reason for anything to change today. However, as soon as she took the first sip of coffee, Kasia suddenly turned her head and stared at them with her beautiful, blind blue eyes. Unnerved, Sunny looked around, checking if someone else had attracted her attention, and, after making sure that there wasn't Tanyon standing behind him, asked. What? Kasia was silent, asked how hesitating if she should reply, and then suddenly said. Happy birthday. What? Sunny frowned, trying to comprehend the meaning behind her words. Then, a flash of surprise appeared on his face. Oh, right, it's my birthday today. He had completely forgotten about it. He was turning 17 today. Wait, how did she know about this? Sunny gave the blind girl a strange look, opened his mouth, and then decided to let the issue go. She was just too creepy. Thanks. With an Kasia turned away and seemingly lost interest in having a conversation once again. Which was for the better. Sunny returned Tohi's coffee, finding it not too bad this time. Of course, sugar and cream were doing most of the work. However, he did feel a little bit more awake after drinking it. 17, Sunny was never sure that he would make it to this age alive. And yet, despite everything, life was sure unpredictable sometimes. Ivanyon would have told him a year ago that he was going to celebrate his 17th birthday by drinking real coffee with real milk and sugar, he would have laughed in their face. But now it was a reality. Unwillingly, Sunny remembered all the people who used to celebrate his birthdays with him, a long time ago. Before his mood turned sour, he decisively dispelled these thoughts and forced himself to smile. This is not bad, let's do it again next year, when I'm already unawakened. Cheering himself up like that, he finished his coffee and left the cafeteria. There were no classes today, but he still visited the wilderness survival classroom and said his goodbyes to teacher Julius. The old man got pretty emotional when sending him off. He gave Sunny one last tip, a dozen or so times an hour, and even promised to apply for a research assistant position to be opened after the young man had become a full awakened. Sunny left thanking him for his time and patience. After that, there wasn't much to do. When the sun was close to setting, Instructor Rock gathered them in the foyer of the sleeper center and led them outside. In the snowy parks that surrounded the white building, other awakened were leading their own batches of sleepers to the same destination. It was the Academy's medical center. The center looked more like a shrine than a hospital. Its interior contained both highly advanced technology as well as some of the best healers among the awakened. For the duration of their first journey into the dream realm, the bodies of sleepers would be kept safe in specially designed pods and sustained by the magical powers of those healers if anything unfortunate were to happen on the other side of the spell. Of course, whether or not they would wake up in the end wholly depended on the sleepers themselves. To Sunny's surprise, after entering the medical center, Instructor Rock did not take them directly to the wing containing sleeper pods. Instead, held them to a comparatively deserted floor and then opened the doors to a spacious gallery that was brightly illuminated by the beautiful crimson rays of the setting sun. There, they saw rows and rows of wheelchairs. In each wheelchair, there was a person with a blank, strangely peaceful expression on their face. All these people were completely silent, motionless, and still. They did not show any reaction to the appearance of guests. They all seemed to be empty. In the eerie silence, Sunny felt his hair standing up and a creeping terror seeping deep into his heart. Instructor Rock looked at the empty people with solemn eyes. There is a reason I brought you all here. Look well and remember, some of you may know who these people are, for those of you who don't, they are called Hollow. He gritted his teeth. Each one of them was once either a sleeper or unawakened. Some of them were weak, some of them were strong. Some were even incredibly powerful. All of them have perished in the dream realm. Their souls are gone, Sunny realized, horrified. If you're lucky, once your spirit is destroyed, your body dies with it. But if not, you'll become just like them. Hollow. Instructor Rock glanced in the direction where Castor and Nephi stood, and then added. So dinty out there. Half an hour later, sleepers had been led to their personal rooms and were preparing to enter the pods. In one of the rooms, the blind girl, Kasia, was helplessly trying to orient herself in the unfamiliar space, touching the walls and strange pieces of machinery with her hands. Tears were streaming down her beautiful, doll-like face. In the other room, proud Legacy Castor was staring listlessly at the floor. His lips were moving, repeating one strange phrase over and over again. He was trembling. Somewhere else, changing star Nefis, the last daughter of the immortal flame clan, was looking down at her hands. Underneath her skin, soft white radiance was slowly growing brighter and brighter. Her face was contorted in a grimace of harrowing agony. And finally, there was a room where Shadow Slave Sunless, lost from light, turned away from the sleeping pod and glanced down at the shadow. Well, are you ready? The shadow shrugged and didn't answer. Sunny sighed. Yeah, me too. With that, he stepped forward and climbed into the pod. In the vast echoing darkness, he heard, "Welcome to the dream realm, Sunless. Share to your friends." Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 30-30, Starless Void. 1,305 words. Sunny was expecting to first look at the place where his arrival to the dream realm was going to take place from above, just like it that happened at the beginning of the first nightmare. Back then, time had magically moved in reverse, giving him an opportunity to see hints of what he was going to face. Instead, immediately after hearing the greetings of the spell, Sunny found himself blind and drowning. Ash instinctively tried to open his mouth to scream. Salty water rushed inside, making him choke and twitch. More than that, he couldn't see anything. No, it's not that he couldn't see, it's just there was no source of light around. Usually, darkness wasn't a problem for Sunny, but, for some reason, his sight wasn't working anymore. Maybe the seawater he was submerged in was blocking it. If it wasn't for the special space perception that the affinity to shadows gave him, he would have been completely disoriented. With its help, though, he barely managed to understand which side was down, and which side was up. Luckily, Teacher Julius's lessons had included swimming. Swearing to thank both the old man and Master Jet once Hekame back, Sunny forced himself to stay calm and began to swim upward. An a long intense seconds, his head broke through the surface of the water. Sunny was finally able to draw a native, hoarse breath. Breathe, breathe, you are still alive. After sucking in enough air to soothe his burning lungs and compose himself to a certain degree, Sunny carefully spun in the water, trying to take in his surroundings. What met him was an endless, jet black expanse of undulating waves. Above them was an empty black sky. There was no moon, no stars, just a dark vastness of repressive nothingness. Sunny blinked a few times, cold dread taking hold of his heart. This is, Azia, on ocean. Was I dropped in the middle of on ocean? No, it couldn't be. There had to be solid ground somewhere nearby. Ashawa's gripped by a momentary panic, a remote sound suddenly drew his attention. Sunny turned around and saw a triangular dorsal fin moving in his direction. Luckily, it was still hundreds and hundreds of meters away. Wait, if it's so far away, then how come I can see it so clearly? Despite being submerged in water, Sunny still felt like there was suddenly cold sweat all over his body. By his estimation, that dorsal fin was at least 5 meters tall. It was rapidly approaching, growing visibly larger with each second. Damn you, spell. With eyes full of horror, Sunny spun again, desperately trying to find something, anything, to save him. And there, a short distance away, he finally noticed a black mass protruding slightly above the water. Not wasting even a second on thinking, Hess started to swing his arms and legs, swimming in the direction of the black mass with a considerable speed. However, no matter how fast Hess swam, the giant shadow of the unknown creature was closing the distance between them much faster. Asmo part of Sunny's mind managed to preserve its rationality even when faced with this boundless, primal fear. Not allowing himself to slip entirely into panic, Sunny tried to think, and then silently commanded his own shadow to wrap itself around his body. Instantly, his speed increased twofold. Just seconds before the unknown colossus got to him, Sunny reached the black mass, stretched out his hands, and pulled himself out of the water. He rolled away from the edge, scratching his skin on the uneven rocks, and jumped in fright when the whole surface underneath him shuddered, asked how something massive had collided with it. As Sunny backed out, terrifying jaws appeared from the water, with rows and rows of giant teeth, each one as long as was tall. He opened his eyes wide, understanding that the rock he had climbed on was not tall enough to save him from the monster. Why is it even trying to eat me? I'm too small to be considered a filling snack for something this enormous. However, before the monster had a chance to attack, a colossal tentacle suddenly broke through the water and rose into the air like some strange, black tower. Before too long, it fell down, entangling the owner of the giant maw and pulling it back under the water. Sunny lost the feeling in his legs and plopped on the ground, his mouth opened. His whole body was shaking. A few seconds later, the dark sea was calm again, asked how nothing had happened. The indifferent waves continued to move silently under the lightless sky. So, it wasn't trying to eat me, he realized, frozen. It was trying to run away. A few minutes later, Sunny was pretty sure that nothing was going to over him, at least not immediately. With that certainty, he was finally in a state of mind to stop trembling and explore his surroundings a little. The black mass he climbed onto turned out to be a single stone platform of around 12 meters in diameter. Its surface was mostly flat, covered with grooves, and somewhat dry. Due to the regular shape of its edges, it seemed more like something man-made than a natural formation. But then again, here in the dream realm, it was hard to believe that something, man-made, was actually made by humans, as opposed to. Better not to think about it. The platform wasn't connected to anything, existing a Sadini island in the Sea of Darkness. There wasn't anything else above the water for as far as Sunny was able to see. After discovering that fact, Helso realized something else. It was that he was wet, cold, and completely naked. In his defense, the clothing situation was the last thing one would think about when trying to save themselves from abyssal monsters. Also, it's not like someone was here to witness his stark paleness and private bits. Still, it was sort of cold. Sunny summoned the puppeteer's shroud and watched as dark gray garments covered his body. It even came with a pair of high, soft-soled leather boots. Clad in gray fabric and lusterless leather, he suddenly felt much safer. Not to mention, warm. After that, Sunny sat down in the middle of the platform, as far away from water as could, and tried to remember the unique characteristic of every explored region of the dream realm he could think of. Unfortunately, none of them matched this starless, dark void. Of course not, he thought with a bit of resentment. Even if some unlucky humans had ever come here, I doubt that they were able to return to the real world alive. Not with those things hiding underwater. Not yet desperate enough to leave the platform and try to swim away in search of land, Sunny decided to wait and see. Maybe something was going to change as time went by. With a soft sigh, he habitually looked for his shadow. However, due to the total darkness that surrounded him, it couldn't really be seen. He just barely felt its presence. This must be paradise for you, right? All this gloom and not a star in sight. The shadow, of course, did not answer. Anyway, good job earlier. With Enid, Sunny lay down, using his hands as a pillow. Not thinking about much, he stared into the black sky and waited. The sound of the undulating waves was, actually, quite relaxing. After a while, he closed his eyes and listened. Minutes merged together, growing into hours. Suddenly, Sunny caught a slight change in the sound of the sea. It was asked how something was shifting. He opened his eyes and noticed that one corner of the sky was slowly turning gray. Soon, a glimpse of a pale sun could be seen rising above the horizon. A new day had come to the starless void. And with it, the dark sea suddenly surged. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 31-31. Low Tide. 1,443 words. The black, opaque water suddenly surged and seethed, asked how a living creature desperately trying to avoid the pale light of the coming dawn. Sunny slowly rose and, after some thought, carefully approached the edge of the stone platform. Looking down, he blinked and then kneeled to make sure that what he saw wasn't an illusion. The sea seemed to be receding, slowly at first, and then faster and faster, the water level was dropping. The circular stone formation he had been taking shelter on his toe barely protrude out of the waves, but now there were meters and meters of wet rock between him and the restless surface of the sea. As Sun climbed up, the monstrous ebb tide continued. Soon, Sunny found himself standing on the edge of a tall cliff, with a 100-meter drop separating him from the churning waters. Beneath him, the rock formation broadened and changed shape. However, from his vantage point, it was hard to determine what that shape was, exactly. At that time, the dark surface of the water began to be punctured here and there by sharp crimson blades. As it dropped even further, it was asked how a crimson forest was slowly rising from the black depths. The trees were made of something resembling coral, growing chaotically into each other and stretching toward the sky. They were colossal in size, with irregular protrusions entwining and merging together, looking monumental and eerie in the black and red reality of the sunlit void. The labyrinth formed by this strange reef stretched as far as Sunny could see, broken here and there by protruding cliffs, sudden chasms, and distant natural features. Half an hour later, utterly shocked, Sunny stared down and realized that the sea was completely gone. If not for the black seaweed left hanging on wet rocks and scarlet pillars of coral, he would even doubt if it was ever there. His small circular island had turned into the peak of Fast Ranch, towering, irregularly shaped cliff. Looking down, he felt his head spinning. By then, the night had already fully retreated, letting morning finally take its place. I'm not seeing things, Amy, Sunny thought, pinching himself. What the spell was that? Despite the sudden disappearance of the dark sea and its hidden monsters, Sunny was in a rush to climb down from his circular stone platform. Firstly, he felt that if the sea was able to disappear, it was surely able to come back, perhaps a tany moment. Secondly, he did not know what dangers the coral labyrinth was hiding. Perhaps there was something even scarier than the owner of the giant tentacle down there. But that did not mean that he wasn't going to explore. Coming back to his spot in the middle of the platform, Sunny sat down and commanded his shadow to separate itself from his body. Then, taking control of it, he approached the edge of the platform and nimbly slid down. Habitually moving from one shadow to another, he began the descent. At this moment, Sunny was glad that shadows had no weight and were not affected by gravity. While the shadow was busy climbing down, Sunny yawned. Say, didn't you think that you need a name? Although his shadow was already too far away to hear him, they still could communicate through their shared connection. Of course, the fact that it could did not mean that it would. The shadow was sort of taciturn, mostly because it didn't have vocal cords and was unable to speak. Plus, its temper wasn't that great. How about, shameless? No. What about, shady? Also no. What about something simpler, like, what? Well, do you have suggestions then? Alright, we'll shelve this conversation for later. By the time he was done with this short monologue, the shadow had already reached the bottom of the cliff. The range of shadow control was not limitless, but it was just barely enough to explore their nearest surroundings. Entering the labyrinth, Sunny found it to be extremely disorienting and convoluted. The paths between coral pillars were sometimes broad, sometimes narrow. They twisted and turned without any logic, often leading to dead ends or even back to how he started. More than that, some paths entered inside the coral mounds, turning into dark tunnels. The labyrinth was vast and multi-layered, making Sunny's head hurt after multiple fruitless attempts to memorize the layout of the nearest pathways. In the end, he sent the shadow up, forcing it to climb on top of the crimson forest and start jumping from one sharp coral blade to another, knowing full well that he himself would not be able to do the same. Soon, he circled the strange cliff and froze, scared by the sight of what was happening in its shadow. There, the corpse of the giant shark-like creature that had briefly pursued him the previous night was laying on the ground, the pillars of coral around it shattered and broken. More precisely, half of it was there, with grotesque innards spilling out of the terrible wound and stretching far away into the distance. The other half was gone, asked how it that never existed. Around the corpse, hundreds of smaller monsters were scurrying, tearing away and devouring its flesh bit by bit. Each of them was about 2.5 meters tall, looking like a weird mix of a demonic crab, a centaur, and a nightmare. They had 4 pairs of long, segmented legs that ended inside like protrusions. At the front, a human-like torso was protruding from the carapace, also clad in thick chitinous armor. The head, ifitwas even the appropriate word, was situated directly on top of the torso, with no neck in between. It had 2 narrow eye slits and a vicious-looking mouth with several slimy mandibles. Instead of hands, the monsters had 2 enormous pincers. Currently, they were all using those pincers to tear off chunks of meat off the desiccated corpse and stuff them into their mouths. From time to time, a fight for an especially juicy piece of meat would break out, ending upon a few monsters being torn apart and quickly devoured by the victors. Sunny swallowed, both because the sight of heavily armored, powerful monsters made him nervous and because looking at them feasting, he suddenly felt very hungry. Each of them seems like trouble, and there are hundreds of them. His luck, like always, was awful. At least I didn't have to wonder why the labyrinth feels so empty. All the inhabitants are having a party. Feeling a little bit apprehensive about turning his shadows back to the monsters, Sunny commanded it to look back and study the cliff he was taking shelter atop of. Something about it was making him feel uneasy. The shadow turned around and looked up, taking in the sight of the strangely shaped cliff. It took Sunny a few minutes to shift his perspective and recognize it for what it was. That's a finger. That's a hand. That is a sword. He blinked. It's a statue. Indeed, the cliff was man-made. It was an ancient, colossal statue at least 200 meters tall. The scale of it was so massive that it boggled the mind. From what Sunny could see, it depicted a knight clad in an elaborate plate armor, with 7 shining stars carved into his breastplate. In his hands, he was holding a gargantuan sword, pointing it to the ground. However, the most striking thing about it was that the giant stone knight was missing his head. In fact, the roughly circular platform Sunny was standing on turned out top at the top of his neck. And by the looks of it, the head wasn't missing by design. It was asked how something, or someone, had violently tore it off at some point in the distant past. Sunny walked around the platform, looking down from all sides, but didn't notice the head lying anywhere near. What on earth iced this place? Without any hints to find the answer, held his shadow back to the giant's neck and settled at the western edge of it, studying the feasting monsters. He didn't move until the sun was about to set. Just as Sunny expected, as soon as sun touched the horizon, a deafening rumble could be heard coming from somewhere below. The monsters instantly stopped their feast and scurried away, some hiding inside the coral pillars, some simply burying themselves in the soft soil. A few minutes later, the first streams of black water appeared in the labyrinth. Their volume quickly grew, and soon an apocalyptic flood devoured everything around. The sea was returning with the approach of the night. Sunny stared at this unimaginable process, thoughts churning in his head. An hour, the circular platform was the only thing above the dark waters once again. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 32-32, Making a Choice. 1,621 words. With an empty stomach and a head full of thoughts, Sunny returned to the center of the platform and sat down. After a while, he beckoned Tohi's shadow and said, "Wake me up if anything happens." Then, he closed his eyes and tried to fall asleep. His consciousness quickly slid into the sweet embrace of darkness, giving Sunny some well-needed rest. In the middle of the night, however, a sudden impulse stirred him awake. Sunny jumped to his feet, his groggy mind full of apprehension. He was afraid that the owner of the giant tentacle had come back to finish the job. Or maybe some other horror from the depths had sensed him and decided to snack on human meat. However, the sea was quiet and calm. Didn't there any abnormalities around the night statue? "What is it?" Sunny whispered, addressing the shadow. The shadow silently pointed him in a particular direction. Turning his head, Sunny squinted. He quickly understood why it was a good idea to wake up. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to see. Out there in the distance, a few kilometers away, a small orange light was shimmering in the darkness. Its reflections were rising and falling with the movement of waves. It was too far away to make out any details, so Sunny just stared at it for a while. Pretty soon, the light disappeared. Other sleepers, natural phenomenon, or some monster laying a trap. Memories of nightmarish deep-water creatures immediately came to his mind. Shaking his head, Sunny lay back down and attempted to return to his slumber. However, this time sleep was escaping him. Pangs of hunger were still not unbearable, but slowly becoming more and more intense. The thirst, however, was worse. In the end, he remained awake up until the sun rose again, sending the dark sea in retreat. As soon as morning came, the pincer monsters crawled back from their hiding spots and rushed to the giant carcass to continue their feast. Sunny watched them for some time and then walked to the opposite side of the platform to take a look in the direction where he had seen the mysterious light the previous night. At a considerable distance from the headless statue, 5 or 6 kilometers away, the ground rose naturally and formed something akin to a hill. On top of that hill, an especially massive coral pillar rose to the sky. From the looks of it, its upper branches were just high enough to stay above water in the night. Various ideas stormed into Sunny's head, but at the end of it, only 2 questions were really important. First of all, would he be able to find the way through the labyrinth and cover that distance during the day? And more importantly, should he even attempt to do it? After all, there was no indication that the source of the mysterious light was something beneficial, as opposed to dreadful and deadly. Not having enough information to make a choice, Sunny settled back to study the monsters. Headed, however, sent the shadow to investigate as far into the labyrinth as range of shadow control allowed, hoping to chart at least the beginning of the path that could potentially lead him to that hill. Logically speaking, he was as safe atop the headless statue as she probably could be in this strange place. The only problem was, he was going to die soon because of thirst or hunger. Both problems were solvable if he were to venture down. Heckle desalinate the seawater in a number of ways taught to him by teacher Julius, with materials that were present pretty much everywhere in the dream realm. Heckle also prepare traps and hunt a pincer monster to eat. With their massive size, just one of them would be no to him for weeks. Heckle easily see such a routine, hunting by day, returning to the statue at the approach of the night. It was probably his safest choice. However, this way of doing things lacked one vital element, the potential for improvement. It was well suited for keeping Sunny alive, but had no way of giving him hope. Ifei was destined to spend the rest of his life in the small area surrounding the headless statue, devouring monsters and trembling at night in fear of being devoured by something bigger in turn. Well, he would rather just jump down and end it right now. That pretty much meant that the only choice left for him was to try and reach the source of the orange light. And if Sunny was really trying to attempt it, he had to do it before the pincer monsters were done consuming the giant carcass. That way, at least, the surrounding segment of the labyrinth was going to be free of them. Firm in his choice, Sunny decided to leave the headless statue the next morning. He would spend the rest of today exploring paths through the labyrinth and preparing himself mentally. With that, he closed his eyes and concentrated his perception on the moving shadow. In the night, a sudden storm descended upon the dark sea. Sunny was stirred awake by the shadow in time to prepare himself for the crushing winds and the pelting rain. Usually, rain always put him in a bad mood, but this time he was too thirsty to think about anything except for fresh water. Staying low so as to not be blown over the edge of the platform, Sunny cupped his hands and waited until they became filled with rainwater. Then he raised them to his mouth and greedily drank. Strikes of lightning illuminated everything above the churning sea. If anyone were to see Sunny now, they would have noticed a wide grin on his face. The storm continued to rampage for several hours. Sunny crouched in the middle of the platform, enduring its rage. More than once, a tall wave would crash into the headless knight's neck, threatening to wash him away. But Sunny held tight to the deep grooves in the stone surface of the platform, sticking to it like glue. By morning, when the storm finally dissipated, all of his muscles were sore. But there was no time to oust. As soon as monsters came back to the carcass, with a few stragglers quickly following behind, he slid over the edge of the platform and began to nimbly climb down. Sunny had to thank wilderness survival classes once again, since he had been taught the basics of rock climbing as well. Teacher Julius was adamant about giving his student a crash course in all possible forms of traversal. Additionally, Sunny had already scouted the optimal way down and memorized the best holds and indentions to grab onto with the help of his shadow. Soon, his feet finally touched the ground. Despite the fact that leaving the safety of the headless statue was going to put him in considerable danger, Sunny instantly felt his mood improving. Remaining passive for the last couple of days did not suit his character well. Now, even if his plan were to end in failure, at least he was going to go down doing something that he had decided to do. Trying and failing was better than not trying at all. The black mud was deep enough to slow him down, but not to the extent he had been afraid of. With some practice, Sunny was soon able to walk at an acceptable speed. Whattismore, as long Ash stuck to the shadows, his steps were light and silent, producing no squelching noises from the mud. He headed for one of the paths that were supposed to lead him to the distant hill and entered the cool shade of the Crimson Labyrinth. Immediately, a strange feeling enveloped his mind. It was asked how the world beyond the labyrinth did not exist anymore, and all that was left were its twisting, dark paths. This thing almost seems endless. Shaking his head, Sunny sent the shadow to scout ahead, hoping Toby notified Ophani latent danger in advance, and began to move forward. His life now depended on whether or not he would reach the distant hill before the sun began to set. He didn't even want to think about what would happen if he were still inside the labyrinth once the dark sea came back in an unstoppable flood. The shadow moved ahead of him, not meeting any hurdles. Sometimes it would climb high to scout the direction of different paths, allowing Sunny to choose the optimal route most of the time. However, he still had to backtrack a considerable distance once or twice, ending Upether in a dead end or an up leading in the wrong direction. Despite that, everything seemed to be going smoothly. Sunny even had time to carefully study the interior of the labyrinth, noticing more details of its composition, as well as soft-widening amount of unrecognizable bones hiding in the mud beneath his feet. Because of how well things were going, he lowered his guard a little. His arrogance was also to blame. With his extensive preparations and skillful control of the Shadow Scout, Sunny subconsciously patted himself on the shoulder and assumed that everything was going to be fine. Patsy, when the mud directly in front of him started to move, he was a fraction of a second late to react. In the next moment, a massive pincer shot out of the ground and tore through the air, threatening to cut his body in half with one crushing strike. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 33-33, Carapace Scavenger. 1,340 words. Crap, this was the only thought in Sunny's head. Ash awkwardly fell backward, allowing the pincer to close right in front of his face with a loud clack. The jagged, chitinous blades were so close that he could clearly see bits of mud sticking to their surface. Sunny landed on his back, narrowly avoiding the unexpected strike. The good thing was that he managed to avoid being injured or even killed. The bad thing was that he was sprawled on the ground, unable to quickly create distance between him and the attacker. The massive pincer was still hovering above. Just as his realization dawned on Sunny, head desperately rolled to the side. In the next moment, the pincer lunged down, sending small tremors through the mud. If not for his quick reaction, Sunny's chest would have been caved in beneath that blow. He was just beginning to stand up when the pincer swiped sideways. Luckily, Sunny was ready. Instead of trying to dodge or block the attack, he went with it, letting the pincer collide with his outstretched hands and cushioning the blow. Ash's arms screamed in pain. Sunny used the force of the blow and allowed his body to ascend flying through the air. This way, at least, he would get out of the pincer's range. He might not have been taught how to fight, but one thing Heck knew very well was how to fall. Instead of breaking his neck or having the breath beaten out of him by the landing, he braced his body and nimbly rolled before stopping some distance away from the ambushing monster. I take it back, Sunny thought, remembering his sarcastic critique of Harrow's battle rolls. Rolling ice an integral part of any respectable monster fighting technique. Then, he looked up, trying to ascertain the situation. In front of him, the attacker had finally shown itself. It rode from under the mud, casting a vast shadow over kneeling Sunny. Its tiny eyes were full of rage, hunger, and malice. It was one of the pincer monsters he had spent so much time observing. Towering over him at almost 3 meters in height, the bulky creature moved its mandibles and produced a jarring, piercing screech. Why aren't you devouring the giant carcass with the rest of your buddies, you crab bastard? However, the answer to Sunny's indignant plea was rather obvious. The monster seemed to be in a rather bad shape. Half of its 8 side-like legs were broken, and there were cracks in its thick carapace, each oozing with viscous azure blood. Additionally, he was missing one of its 2 pincer arms, which seemed to have been torn off entirely at the shoulder. If not for this pathetic state, the creature would have had no need to hide in the mud, hoping to catch easy prey. It could have just followed the other monsters and joined on the feast. Sunny was just unlucky to stumble directly upon its ambush. He had relied too much on the scouting abilities of his shadow, forgetting that it wasn't much more observant than an awakened human. It was also weightless and inaudible. Patsy the monster did not react when the shadow had passed over its trap a minute earlier. On the other hand, Sunny could also consider himself lucky. By the same logic, he would not have been able to dodge the creature's sudden attack if not for its crippled, slowed state. But pondering on his luck could wait for later. Right now, Sunny had a far more pressing thing to do. Namely, try to survive. Get back here, he ordered the shadow and jumped to the side. In the next second, the space he occupied a moment before was torn apart by the attacking monster. Its heavy pincer crashed into the side of a coral pillar, sending crimson shards flying in every direction. Sunny caught his balance and continued moving. He was hoping that the bulky, heavily armored, wounded creature would not be able to match his speed, but unfortunately, it turned out to be surprisingly agile. Its side-like legs pierced the mud behind him, and the pincer was already flying through the air again, threatening to decapitate the young man at any second. Sunny ducked, dodging the pincer, and finally caught a second of reprieve. His eyes darted around, desperately searching for something Tao saw weapon. Almost instantly, he noticed a long, smooth, sharp bone left behind by some unknown creature sticking from the mud. Without slowing down, he bent down and grabbed the bone, pulling it out with one forceful tug. The bone was almost 1.5 meters long, ending in a narrow, sharp tip. It was almost like a spear. The problem was, even with the added length of this makeshift spear, Sunny's range of attack was still shorter than the monster's. He also doubted that it was capable of piercing the hard carapace. In short, he had to get close and aim for one of the cracks in the creature's armor. However, he didn't dare to. At that short of a distance, the monster could easily crush him into a past biasing just its weight and hulking frame. A crazy idea entered Sunny's mind. Abbott shocked, he momentarily couldn't decide whether it was the product of audacity or foolishness. Either way, Huey isn't insane enough to actually consider it. At that moment, the pincer lashed out again. This time, Sunny was a little late to evade, and as a result, a sharp pain pierced his left leg. It was grazed by the edge of the pincer. The puppeteer's shroud held, not allowing the monster to draw blood, but the force of the impact was enough to throw Sunny tumbling to the ground. There was no time to recover. Ash's eyes opened wide. Sunny understood that it was time to act crazy. So, instead of trying to dodge, he stopped moving and allowed the monster to grab him across his torso with the pincer. Immediately, a terrible pressure descended on his ribs. Sunny felt asked how he was going to be split apart, but his armor, received from defeating an awakened tyrant, resisted the crushing bite of the monster's pincer. Every muscle in his body tensed, delaying the moment when his insides would be turned into mush. In the next second, Sunny's shadow fell from above, wrapping itself around the puppeteer's shroud. With the protective properties of the armor enhanced, he was able to better resist the pincer's pulverizing embrace. Sunny and the monster appeared to be at an impasse. The young man couldn't free himself from the monster's grip, while the monster could not kill the prey by cutting it in halves with its pincer. They stared at each other. Then, an insane fire ignited in the creature Ashayas. It clicked its mandibles and raised Sunny in the air, bringing him closer to its mouth, obviously intent on biting his head off. Why is everyone trying to eat me? Am it that tasty? Sunny didn't struggle as monster brought him close to its mandibles. Heck knew he only had one chance to live. In the last moment, Sunny allowed the shadow to flow from puppeteer's shroud onto the sharp bone he was still clenching in his hand. Then, he gathered all his strength, leaned forward and thrust the bone forward with as much power as could. Guided by his hand, the dark bone spear shot forward and pierced through the creature's tiny eye, sinking in deep. The other eye of the monster narrowed. Gritting his teeth from the unbearable pain in his ribs, Sunny twisted the bone, trying to do as much damage to the creature's brain as possible. For a couple of seconds, nothing happened. Then, he felt the pressure on his body diminishing. The pincer opened, letting Sunny fall down. Asha hit the mud, the hulking monster crashed to the ground, too. The bone spear was still sticking from its head, bathed in the stream's officer liquid. Sunny moaned and drew an spy, painful breath. You have slain an awakened beast, carapace scavenger. You have received a memory, Azure Blade. Your shadow grows stronger. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 34-34. Only Steel remembers. 1,312 words. Sunny was sprawled in the mud, trying to catch his breath. The subtle voice of the spell echoed in his ears. Your shadow grows stronger. Immediately, he felt a slight change. His body grew a little bit stronger, his vision a little sharper, his skin a little smoother. The change was minimal, but apparent. What was that? He had a guess, and it was easy to confirm. Sunny summoned the runes. Shadow fragments. 14 1,000ths. Previously, he only had 12 of the mysterious shadow fragments, with no knowledge on how to acquire more. Now it seemed that the process was automatic. He only had to kill an enemy to absorb a part of their shadow and enhance his own core. More than that, the number of fragments he was able to receive wasn't directly correlated to the number of slain enemies. After a bit of thinking, Sunny came to a preliminary conclusion. Dormant soul cores gave him 1 fragment, while awakened ones gave 2. However, only enemies he defeated directly, more or less, counted. Killing the Mountain King's larva, a dormant beast, had given him 1 shadow fragment. Finishing off the veteran slaver, a dormant human, another. Mountain King itself was an awakened tyrant, which meant that it had 5 awakened cores. With each giving Sunny 2 shadow fragments, he ended up with a total of 12. And now, after killing the carapace scavenger, he had 14. Interestingly, he didn't receive any fragments from the deaths of Shifty, Scholar and Hero, even though they perished as a result of his machinations. It seems he had to finish an enemy off with his own 2 hands to absorb a part of their shadow. Well, or at least by summoning an ancient dead god. The process was quite similar to how normal awakened increased their power, with the only difference being that the steps of extracting and consuming the corresponding material, soul shards, were skipped in favor of instant absorption. That meant that shadow fragments could not be bested, and subsequently could not be bought or traded. Human have an opportunity to receive them as a reward for completing missions, providing services or selling various spoils. If Sunny wanted to grow stronger, his only option was to fight and kill. No peaceful life for me, I guess. Previously, Sunny thought that he at least had the choice to choose a relatively safe path. Many awakened never left the confines of human citadels and never faced nightmare creatures, choosing instead to perform various jobs in the dream realm just as he would in the real world. They received payments in the form of soul shards, which were simultaneously the fuel of phone's progression and the universal currency inside the citadels. Sunny was never set on pursuing such a life, but not even having a choice was sort of irritating. Luckily, there was a bright side, too. Without the need to soul shards to strengthen his core, he would be able to spend everything he earns freely and without concern. After all, after he kills enemy and absorbs the shadow fragments, the soul shard would still be there, ready to be collected in exchange for something Sunny might need in the future. That would effectively make him twice as efficient in terms of earning and spending, which was not a small advantage. Additionally, there was the matter of the shadow core. Since both Sunny and his shadow were tied to it, strengthening the core would not only increase Sunny's power but also enhance the shadow. So, if you were Tao Sido further empower himself, the actual effect would best act, producing a twofold enhancement. So, for each shadow fragment he collected, Sunny would actually be able to reap twice as much benefit as on awakened wood from a soul shard. Not bad at all. Ah, the future was bright. Provided He survives and gets the opportunity to even have a future, of course. Sitting up, Sunny moved his eyes and found the cluster of runes describing his memories. Azure Blade, had finally gotten a weapon. Memory, Azure Blade, memory rank, awakened, memory type, weapon, memory description, this forgotten shore, only steel remembers. Interesting, not very informative, but interesting. Sunny summoned his new weapon, and a sharp, light sword immediately appeared in his hand. It was about a meter long, including the handle. The blade was straight and single-edged, ending in an angular tip. It was forged out of Azure steel, with a beautiful layered pattern. Deep inside the steel, white sparks could be seen. The crossguard was minimalistic and simple, offering almost no protection to the wielder's hands. If Sunny knew his way around cold weapons, he would have called it a Tang Dao. However, he had no idea about such things. All he could gather was that the blade was single-edged, which meant that it was probably meant for slashing and cutting as opposed to piercing, and that the handle was long enough to accommodate two hands. Also, the sword was pretty. He summoned the shadow and made ITW wrap itself around the azure blade. Immediately, the steel became bluish-black, with a scattering of white sparks. It looked like a starlit night sky. Sunny stood up and waved the sword a couple of times, getting accustomed to its weight. The sharp edge whistled as it cut the air. Well, now I finally look like Ariel awakened. After that, Hecasta gazed at the corpse of the carapace scavenger and grimaced. This part was not going to be pleasant. After some time, he managed to break open the cracked carapace and cut away a few strips of tender, pink meat. Helso did not forget to extract the radiant crystal from the beast's chest, the soul shard. Without much hope, He tried to absorb the shard, remembering how it was supposed to be done. Just as expected, nothing happened. There are really of no direct use tome. With a shrug, Sunny placed the shard in the meat in a makeshift rucksack he weaved from black seaweed and looked at the sun. The day was still young. He still had a good chance of making it to the distant hill before the sea came back. However, his left leg was banged up in the fight with the scavenger beast, so walking was not as easy as it was before. He gritted his teeth and began limping. Hours passed. Due to his bruises and increased vigilance, Sunny's progress slowed down considerably. He was sweating and grinding his teeth, feeling pain with each step. What a source, the further he reached into the labyrinth, the more confusing and entangled the paths became. Even with the shadow shelf, he constantly had to backtrack and struggled to move in the right direction. Crap. If nothing changed, Sunny would not reach his goal, which meant that he'll crushed to death by the returning sea. Not allowing himself to think about dying, Sunny tried to walk faster. However, he couldn't be too hasty. Making a wrong turn would have taken precious minutes away from him, so he had to choose the way carefully. Additionally, failing to notice another ambush could end his life directly. Curses. Just when he was beginning to feel desperate, his shadow suddenly saw something that momentarily sent Sunny into a stupor. Some distance further down the path, beyond a few turns, the corals widened, creating a small clearing. And in the middle of that clearing, someone was walking across the mud. The first thing Sunny saw was fair skin, a lot of skin. The tall, lithe girl was only dressed in a makeshift skirt and a crude brassiere, both made out of seaweed. However, it didn't seem to bother her. With a calm expression, she stopped and looked back. The wind was playing with her short silver hair. It was Neffy's, the changing star. In one hand, she was holding the end of a strange golden rope. And on the other end of the rope, Cassia, the blind girl, was carefully following behind. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 35-35. A shadow, a star and an oracle. 1,388 words. Gray sky above, black mud below, an endless sea of crimson in between. The stream-like backdrop, two beautiful girls were walking across the labyrinth. One was delicate and fragile, with blonde hair and cerulean, aimless eyes. She was dressed in a simple tunic, with leather sandals on her feet and a cloak the color of sea waves draped around her shoulders. The other was tall and lithe. She had silky silver hair and clear, gray eyes. Her revealing clothes were crudely made out of black seaweed, leaving her fair skin and athletic build exposed. She was poised, alert, and barefoot. A golden rope connected two girls together. Wow, what a sight, Sunny thought. He suddenly regretted that he was not an artist. The picture just begged to be made into a painting. Wait, why am I thinking about that? People, I found people. His heart skipped a beat. If Neffys and Cassia were here, then the orange light from before, most likely, had something to do with them. Which meant that they knew how to get to the tall hill. Which meant that Sunny didn't have to be crushed to death by the high tide. So what do I do now? Huey sent the best at ingratiating himself to their people. In fact, he was the polar opposite. People usually instinctively avoided him. And that was in normal circumstances. This time, however, he had spent a whole 4 weeks making sure that everyone in the academy hated his guts. Good job, Sunny. Still, he was at least useful. In this situation, an additional body was already a great boon when facing hungry monsters. And Huey isn't just anyone. His ability to scout ahead alone was worth a lot. Surely they'll understand that, right? With a heavy sigh, Sunny stepped into shadows and hurried to the clearing. He reached it in a minute or so, hiding and observing the two girls before making a final decision. Helping herself with the wooden staff, blind Cassia slowly approached the middle of the clearing and extended her hand, finding Neffys and touching her on the shoulder. Why did you stop? Neffy supported the blind girl and glanced at the sky. It is getting late. An awkward pause hung between two girls. After some time, Cassia asked, so you think we should turn back? Neffys blinked and cleared her throat. Yes. Sunny was avid amused by their exchange. What is she? Asked on silent type. Then Herod turned Tohi's dilemma and grimaced. How do I approach them? Damn, why ice this so hard? It's not like I'm trying to ask them out on a date. I mean, one of them, both of them. What am I thinking about? Just go and say hi. But then, I've suddenly appeared out of the shadows, not at all like a creep. How high was the probability of them getting spooked and attacking him before noticing that he was not a monster? Wait, why would they? Arg, to hell with this. Deciding on the safest approach, Sunny commanded his shadow to abandon its hiding place and move to a spot where Neffys could clearly see it. Heckle clearly sensed the shadow rolling its eyes. Asid obeyed the order. As soon as shadow started to move, Neffy suddenly snapped her hand sideways. Immediately, a long sword appeared in it, cutting the air. Asid assumed a defensive position. Before the shadow could even take 2 steps out of its hiding spot, it was already pierced by Changing Star's 3 eyes. The shadow froze. It seemed a bit startled. Cassia took a step back. Neff, what is it? Neffys didn't answer immediately, carefully observing the shadow. Then she simply said, "They're a shadow." Cassia's doll-like face paled. "A shadow. Scavengers." The tall girl tilted her head a little. "No, it's a human shadow." This was clearly not what Cassia expected to hear. With an expression of surprise, she asked, "A human shadow? What is it doing?" Neffys hesitated. After a while, she answered in a flat tone. Quote. "It's waving at us." After a whole minute of silence, Cassia finally found the words to react. "What? I said. It's waving. Yes, I know. I mean, why is it doing that?" Neffys opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know. Maybe it's a distraction tool you're using to atrap." At this point, Sunny decided that it was time to talk. He inhaled deeply, then said in a friendly tone, "Actually, I just sent it ahead to make sure that you didn't stab me with that sword before realizing that I'm human." Immediately, Neffys turned her head, pinpointing the exact location where Sunny was hiding in a blotch of shadows. Her sword slightly shifted, aiming at the new threat. "I fear human, why are hiding in the shadows like a creep?" "Goddammit, I'm not a creep," Sunny hoped, but his flaw was merciless. He had to provide an answer, and a truthful one at that. "I mean, you're Changing Star Neffys." "To be honest, I'm a little afraid." Neffys did not answer, because of her hard to red face, it was almost impossible to determine whether she believed him or not. However, he included her true name in his answer for a reason. If he was some monster pretending to be human, he wouldn't have known it. Luckily, Cassia was more expressive. "Are you the boy who sat with me in the cafeteria?" Sunny smiled. Meanwhile, Neffys glanced at the blind girl. "Do you know him?" Cassia nodded. "I recognize his voice. His name is Sunless. He was in second to last place in the rankings, right above me." The tall girl frowned, as if trying to remember. Then she asked, "The pervert." The smile disappeared from Sunny's face, replaced by exasperation. "Oh, come on." Cassia hesitated and didn't answer. "Hey, I'm not really a pervert, you know. I just, said a few things. To a few girls. It was all a misunderstanding." Neffys was silent for a few seconds, and then, finally, dismissed her sword. "Okay, you can come out." Sunny limped out of the shadows, summoning his own back. It flowed to his feet and reattached itself, visibly shaking. The bastard was laughing at them. Stopping a few meters away from Neffys, he raised his hands, showing that he didn't mean the girls any harm. Changing Star gave him an inquisitive look. "What happened to you?" She was referring to his limp, bruises, and overall banged-up look. Sunny sighed. "Carapace scavenger." Neffys raised an eyebrow. "You managed to get away alive." "You bet I did." Sunny subconsciously straightened his back. "It didn't get away. I killed it." To prove his point, he gestured at this rucksack, full of delicious monster meat. Neffys looked him over again, re-evaluating her opinion of him. Now, there were hints of approval in her eyes. Carapace scavengers were only beasts, but they were still awakened. With the addition of their mighty physique and natural armor, defeating one was not an easy feat for any sleeper, who all had a dormant core. Let alone someone from the very bottom of the ranking list. Come to think of it, it was even a bit too outstanding. Sunny lowered his eyes. It was already wounded. Neffys shrugged. "A kill is a kill. You did well." After that, she fell silent, asked how, not planning to say anything else. Sunny also wasn't sure what to say. Luckily, Cassia came to the rescue. "Are you seriously injured?" He shook his head. "No, it's just that my ribs and leg are bruised. I'll be fine in a day or two. My armor is pretty resilient." Huas worried that they might be tempted to kill him to get the puppeteer's shroud. That was because memories were destroyed at the moment of their owner's death. Sunny only could be transferred voluntarily by a living person. Well, there was always torture and blackmail. But he doubted that any one of the 2 beautiful girls would stoop to that. Sunny cleared his throat. "Before stumbling on the scavenger, I was heading for the tall hill with the massive coral pillar on top. But after the fight, my speed decreased. Now I'm worried about not making it in time. Do you perhaps know the way?" Cassia smiled. "Actually, we spent the last days on the hill. We were just about to go back." Neffys didn't say anything, looking at the sky. Sunny licked his lips. "Well, can I come with you?" "They're not going to say. No, right?" The blind girl turned her head to her companion, a clear question written on her face. Neffys lowered her eyes, staring at Sunny. After a while, she said, "No, what? Problem? No problem. What is wrong with you, princess? Can't you speak faster?" Feeling his heart beating wildly in his chest, Sunny smiled. "Well, alright, share to your friends." Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 36-36, Bonfire. 1,532 words. The rest of the way to the tall hill did not take a lot of time. With Neffys leading the way, taking all the right turns at all the right places, there was no need to explore the labyrinth and backtrack after encountering a dead end. Additionally, there were no scavengers around. In fact, they could have moved ever quicker if not for Cassia, who walked slowly even with the help of her staff. Guided by the golden rope, she carefully explored the ground ahead before taking each step. The uneven paths of the Crimson Forest were not an ideal surface for a blind person to walk on. Sunny didn't say much, periodically casting an incredulous glance at the strange pair. No matter how he looked at it, Cassia seemed to be dead weight. Perhaps it was cruel to say, but in the merciless reality of the dream realm, misguided kindness was a sure way to end up dead. Before meeting and observing the girls, he still had hope that Cassia's terrible flaw hid an unexpected and powerful aspect. But from what he saw, it wasn't the case. If she couldn't even walk properly, what kind of power was there to hide? Nothing could outweigh the ruthless fact that the blind girl couldn't protect herself, and thus would only drag her companions down. One had to be fool or not fond of living to allow that to happen. So, which one of these descriptions suited Neffys? Somehow, he felt that neither did. The sunset was not far off when they reached the hill. After climbing it and approaching the massive growth of coral, Neffys dismissed the golden rope and immediately summoned it again. This way, it was untied and appeared in her hands in a neat bundle. Ah, so it's a memory. Sunny wondered what qualities the magical rope had. Soon, his curiosity was satisfied. Right in front of his surprised eyes, the length of the rope suddenly began to increase. Soon, it was thrice as long as it was before. Neffys calmly tied both ends of the rope into loops and then threw one of them into the air, accurately coiling it around a prominent protrusion near the top of the coral pillar. Then, she tested if the rope would hold, swiftly climbed Yupan and waved from above, giving Sunny the signal to follow. After hesitating for a second, Sunny approached the rope and grabbed it. He couldn't help thinking that this would bait a perfect opportunity to cut his head off. With him helpless while climbing and Neffy standing on the top of the pillar, yeah. The vivid picture appeared in his mind. Stop being paranoid, Sunny thought, trying to calm himself down. It's not that he was sure of changing Star's impeccable moral qualities. Instead, he was certain of one thing. If Neffys really wanted to kill him, she wouldn't have needed to wait for an opportunity. She could have just cut him into ribbons whenever. Simultaneously scared and reassured by this thought, Sunny nimbly climbed Yupan and joined Neffys at the top of the coral mound. Heaven turned around and watched curiously, wondering how Cassia was going to get to them. The blind girl dismissed the wooden staff and approached the rope. Then she caught it in a hand, traced it down to the loop at the end, and placed her foot inside. As soon as he was done, Neffys grabbed the rope and started pulling, lifting Cassia little by little until she had reached the top. She only had to grab Neffys' hand and make a step to join them. Efficient. The coral mound was much larger than the circular stone platform of the giant knight's neck. In fact, it was almost like a small island. At the highest point of the island, hidden behind some coral blades, the girls had made a little camp. There were piles of seaweed to sleep on, strips of scavenger meat drying under the sun, and a fire pit. Sunny pointed to the makeshift fire pit. Was it you 2 nights ago? I've seen an orange light in the distance. Cassia's face darkened. Yes, this was the first time we made a fire. But it turned out to be really bad mistake. Neffys sighed. Sunny raised an eyebrow, surprised. Why? The blind girl touched her hair and turned her head to Neffys. At night, any light will attract monsters. We were attacked by scavengers first, and then, she paled and didn't finish, but she didn't have to. The memory of the colossal tentacle was still fresh in Sunny's mind. It seemed that he was lucky to meet these two when he had. If not, he was certainly going to make a fire tonight to roast some scavenger meat. I see. Neffys looked at the sky and cleared her throat. It should be fine now. We still have time before the sun sets. After that, she got busy making the fire. Cassia simply sat on a pile of seaweed and waited. Not knowing what to do, Sunny lowered himself to the ground and let his tired, bruised body rest. After a while, he said, I have fresh meat in me rucksack. Do you have water? Cassia smiled. Yes. After that, she extended an arm to him. A second later, a beautiful bottle made of patterned blue glass appeared in her hand. That's a memory I have. It's always full. Sunny took the glass bottle and looked at it with envy. An endless supply of water. Sure beats my super loud bell. Thank you. He brought the bottle to his lips and greedily drank the cool, delicious water. Indeed, no matter how much he drank, the amount of water inside did not seem to decrease. Is it really endless? Cassia touched her hair again. Not really. If you turn it upside down and let the water flow, it will stop in half an hour or so. But then it will be full again pretty soon. At that time, Neffys was already done making the fire. Without looking up, she took Sunny's rucksack and opened it. Immediately, the soul shard rolled out. The tall girl looked at it, then at Sunny. Then she put the shard back in and pulled out the meat. Sunny became tense, preparing a misleading answer. But Neffys did not ask. So, he pretended like nothing had happened and continued his conversation with Cassia. It's still a great memory. Getting drinkable water is not an easy task. Cassia nodded and smiled, pleased by his words. Soon, the rich smell of roasting meat permeated the air. At the same time, the sun was beginning to approach the horizon. A loud rumble came from somewhere beneath, and first traces of the black water began to appear between crimson walls of the labyrinth. Sunny looked east, where the skies were already growing dark. Then he uncomfortably shifted. Das scavengers come all the way up here. Neffys turned the meat and nodded. Yes, but only at night. In the day, most of them seem to disappear. Sunny grinned, having an idea of why there weren't talent of monsters in the labyrinth in the day. That's because they all gather near the place I had been spending my time recently. You should have seen it, the tall cliff to the west of here. Well, it is actually a statue. Cassia opened her eyes wide. A statue, but for you to survive, it should be. Yes, it's a giant statue of a knight, at least 200 meters tall. He's missing his head, so I hid on top of the neck. Anyway, the day we were sent here, 2 sea creatures fought each other near that statue. When the water receded, I saw an enormous carcass lying there, with hundreds of scavengers slowly tearing it apart. Neffys nodded. That would explain the lack of nightmare creature in the day. How long? Sunny blinked. How long what? Changing Star stared at them for a few seconds, making everyone feel uncomfortable. How long? Until they are done devouring the carcass. Oh, 1 day more, 2 at most. Neffys turned away, took the meat away from the fire, and then quickly extinguished it. There's definitely something wrong with that girl. The 3 of them ate in the dimming light of the twilight. The meat was juicy, tender and indescribably delicious. It was better than anything Sunny had ever tasted, even back in the academic cafeteria. Of course, his excruciating hunger played a part in that. From time to time, they would pass the glass bottle to each other. When they were finished with their meal, the dark sea was back, and the night was upon them. Everything was consumed by absolute darkness. Of course, Sunny could easily see both Neffys and Cassia. Under the cover of the night, Changing Star remained pretty much the same. The blind girl, however, allowed her true emotions to show, thinking that no one would see. She seemed much more lost, lonely and frightened than she did in the day. As if trying to resist these feelings, Cassia said in a bright voice. How about we formally introduce ourselves? I'm Cassie. Neffys glanced in her direction and shrugged. Next, it was Sunny's turn. He exhaled, glad that they didn't ask his name directly. Most likely, he would still have been able to probe his human name, however, it also might have depended on the wording of the question. Relieved, Hesmel then answered. I'm Sunless, but you can call me Sunny. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 37 to 37. Getting to know each other. 1,545 words. Sunny was slowly growing fond of having conversations in the dark. Without the burden of light, people were more relaxed and honest. It reminded him of the frequent blackouts that used to sweep through the city when he was a little kid. His family had no choice but to huddle together and spend a few hours doing nothing but talking to each other. Now, these dark hours had become some of his most precious memories. He was silent for a few moments and then said, "Since we are going to depending on each other, should we share what abilities and memories we have to our disposal?" This was a logical suggestion. If they were going to fight side by side, knowing each other's strengths was more or less vital. Still, he noticed Neffy's glancing in his direction with a guarded look on her face. Luckily, he was obscured by darkness. "I'll start," Sunny said, both to show his sincerity and to reveal information about himself in a controlled manner. Ifo took the initiative to talk. He still had to tell the truth, but how much and to what extent was still for him to decide. If they were to ask and he had to answer, however, things would become unpredictable. "My attributes give me an affinity to shadows. I also have a slight affiliation to divinity. Lastly, I am prone to finding myself in unlikely situations." Cassie listened carefully, and then lowered her head, asked how embarrassed. He's telling the truth. Not that we doubted your honesty. Why not? I spent so much time earning the reputation of a pathological liar. Sunny cleared his throat and smiled, hiding his nervousness. "Really, that is good talk now, but, why are you so that I am being honest?" The blind girl shifted a little. "Oh, that's my ability. I can see people's attributes. Sometimes, I also receive, visions. They can boot the future or the past. I mean, that's what I think. It only happened a couple of times." Sunny swallowed, but then relaxed. "So, she is an oracle of sorts. Luckily, her insight is limited to attributes, otherwise, I'd be in real trouble. Still, I'll have to be careful around her." He finally realized how the blind girl had known about his birthday. The question was whether she had seen it in a vision of the future or in a vision of the past. If it was the former, was it safe to assume that he would certainly be able to celebrate at least one more birthday? Or did knowing the future actually affect it and change it? For example, after learning that he was definitely going to survive, Sunny might have naturally relaxed and lowered his guard. Then, he would die as a result of it. It really seemed possible, right? That's assuming that the future could be changed. But maybe it wasn't. Then, feeling his head hurting, Sunny decided to avoid this line of thought for now. Instead, he had his inner turmoil and said in a friendly tone, "That's a good ability. Speaking of abilities, you have already seen mine. My shadow can move independently and explore. It can't affect the material world, but we share sight and hearing. That way, I can spot danger before encountering it. The shadow is fast and stealthy. It can go anywhere and is almost impossible to notice. Oh, I can also see in the dark." Hesmold, expecting the girls to understand and appreciate the utility of his shadow scout. Their reaction, however, was a bit strange. Neffy slowly turned her head in his direction, while Cassie became a bit pale and raised her hands to cover her chest. What?" Neffy frowned and said in a flat tone. "Have you ever used your ability in the academy?" Sunny blinked. "What a strange question. In the academy? Sure, of course. Why? Oh, right, they think that I'm a pervert. Crap." Before the girls could say anything, he hurriedly raised his hand and blurted. "But I have never used it to do anything improper. You have to believe me." Fortunately, it was the honest truth. However, both Neffy and Cassie looked skeptical. Sunny gritted his teeth. "I had more important things to do than whatever you're thinking about. I spent almost every waking hour learning how to survive." Neffy raised an eyebrow. "I haven't seen you in class, even once." Sunny chuckled. "Of course, you didn't. While you were busy wiping the floor with other sleepers, I was studying wilderness survival." It was Changing Star's turn to blink. "Wilderness, what? There is a course?" Cassie seemed equally puzzled. "Yes, there is. It might seem like an afterthought for most people, but for an outskirts kid like me, who never went to a fancy school or saw a private tutor, learning how to survive in the wilderness is the difference between life and death. Without it, I would have drowned the moment we were sent to the dream realm." On our occasion, Neffy looked completely bewildered. She rubbed her wrists and stared thoughtfully in his direction. "I see. It didn't know." Sunny grimaced and struggled to keep the venom from seeping into his voice. When he finally spoke, his tone was light and amiable. "That's okay. It's natural for someone of your status not talk now." When he mentioned her status, a strange smile appeared on the Changing Star's face. But in the end, she didn't reply. Sunny continued. "Anyway, that's my ability. As for memories, I have 3. One is an armor, one is a sword, and the last one is a really loud bell." Now it was their turn to share. After a short pause, Neffy spoke. "My attributes give me an affinity to light and fire, as well as a strong affiliation to divinity. I have 2 memories. Aro." While she was speaking, Sunny was looking at Cassie, trying to read her expression. From what he saw, Neffy was telling the truth, but also, not the whole truth. And judging by how hard the blind girl was trying to hide her true feelings, the secret hiding among Changing Star's attributes was not at all trivial. Interesting. And a sword. The rope is sturdy and can change its length. The sword is sharp and can protect its wielder against soul's attacks, to a certain extent. My ability, conveyes to hell. Sunny didn't miss the wording of the last part. Conveyes to hell. Does this mean that its main purpose was something else? He was pretty sure that Neffy would not reveal all of her cards, just like him. However, healing abilities were extremely rare. Having one that could heal, but was not limited to healing, that would be simply unheard of. But then again, she was Changing Star, one of the few people in history to receive a true name in the first nightmare. If Sunny were to consider his own aspect ability, nothing seemed impossible. I wonder what her aspect rank is. Outwardly, he pretended to be excited. Yuri Heller, that is great. Having a healer among you is incredible luck. Cassie nodded and smiled. Neff is also an amazing fighter. You should have seen her dealing with those scavengers. Well, I also did not actually see it, but it sounded very scary. Sunny didn't need anyone to tell him how formidable of warrior Neffy was. He had seen it with his own 2 eyes. Sort of. Actually, they were his Shadowshayas. Well, whatever it that instead of eyes. Meanwhile, Cassie sighed. It's my turn. My attributes are nothing special. I guess I have an affinity to revelations and fate. My ability ice like I told you before. It's not very useful. About my memories, I have 3. The bottle, the wooden staff and this armor. You already know about the bottle. The staff can create wind. The armor is actually of the awakened rank. Nef gave it Omin Wemet. It has a very powerful protective charm. So, Shesh not only carrying Cassie on her back, she even gave away her only clothes. An awakened rank armor, at that. What is Neffy's thinking about? The blind girl turned away and added after a while. I used to be pretty decent fencer, before. Now I can trially fight. The last 2 sentences were obviously related to her flaw. Sunny and Neffy's, however, both chose to keep theirs secret. Despite the fact that knowing your companion's flaw was also important for cooperation and having each other's backs, sharing something like that demanded a very high level of trust. Right now, there was no trust between them. And even if there was, Sunny did not plan to ever share his flaw with anyone. Neffy's, too, seemed to have a lot of secrets. After a while, he said, good, that is good. I think we have enough tools to survive, provided we use them right. I guess it's time to sleep. In the darkness, Neffy tilted her head, listening to his words with a distant look. Alright, I'll take watch first. Sunny decided to be helpful and said, actually, my shadow doesn't sleep. It can wake you if something happens. Changing Star slowly smiled. I'll take watch first. Feeling a bit of coldness in her voice, Sunny sighed and shrugged. Suit yourself. What are you going to watch? You can't even see anything. Whatever. Just didn't blame you and something giant swallows using the middle of the night. Then he suddenly shuddered. Wait, that was not a death flag, right? Right, of course not. No way. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 38 to 38. Questions in the dark. 1,728 words. Sleep was avoiding Sunny. For a while, he sat silently in the darkness, listening to the calming rumbling of the waves. In this rare moment of respite, memories of the past few days came flooding into his mind. However, he was too tired to seriously think about anything. He was warm, full, and relatively safe. For now, that was more than enough. Soon, the rhythm of Cassia's breathing changed, indicating that she fell asleep. Neffys was guarding the camp, motionless and, as always, a bit distant. With her silver hair and fair skin, she looked like an alabaster statue. Sunny sighed, struggled for Abbott, and then said quietly, Hey, can I ask you a question? Neffys glanced at them and shrugged. The lack of an audible response clearly indicated that she remembered about his ability to see in the dark. Sure, would it be too personal? Sunny hesitated. It thought you legacies come into the spell with a whole inherited arsenal of memories. I mean, that's supposed to be your main advantage. How come you only had 3? Neffys was silent for a few moments. Actually, I only had 2. The rope came from Cassie. Her raised an eyebrow. Oh, I see. Realizing that her answer wasn't really an answer, Neffys thought for a while and added. Well, most 04 memories when my father passed away. The ones that remained were sold one beyond over the years, to keep the family afloat. This sword and armor came from my first nightmare. So thought a show it was. Sunny realized that the fall of the Immortal Flame clan might have been more thorough than he had thought. Still, something about it didn't make sense. Surely, with your clan's reputation and standing, there were other ways to make money. Without any strong reaction, Neffys simply said, there were other reasons. Then, she unexpectedly turned her head in his direction. Can I ask you a question in return? Sunny swallowed. Yeah, go ahead. Neffys tilted her head. How did you know that I'm a legacy? What? That's it. Simple. I heard Castor mention it. He was scolding other sleepers to make them treat you with respect. She gave him an and turned away. What thoughts were hidden behind her calm gray eyes, Sunny did not know. Some time had passed before he gathered enough courage to ask the question that he really wanted to ask. Before doing it, though, he made sure that Cassie was sound asleep and lowered his voice. Can I ask another question? Without getting a negative response, he continued. Why are you burdening yourself with her? A corner of Changing Star's mouth curled up slightly. Why, wouldn't you? Sunny gritted his teeth, feeling the flaw pushing the truthful answer out of his mouth. No, to be honest, he wanted to believe to the last moment that the answer would be, yes. But one of the things he had lost after the nightmare was the ability to lead to himself. Truth was merciless. It's not that Sunny did not pity the blind girl or didn't want to help her. It's just that Heck knew with certainty that it was simply not something he could do. He was barely able to save himself, let alone carry a helpless person across the dream realm. If Heck tried, they would just die together. Still, Heck couldn't help but be a little disappointed in himself. Neffys, however, did not seem to judge him. She showed no reaction at all. After a few moments, she simply said, because I want to. Because she wants to. That was not the response Sunny expected to hear. He was pretty sure that she would either lecture him about virtue and compassion or disclose some obscure way to make Cassie's seemingly weak ability incredibly useful. However, she did neither. Neffys expected him to believe that she was putting her life in danger, to the point of sacrificing an awakened armor-type memory, because that was something she simply wanted to do. Ridiculous. At first, Hetty's missed her response on an answer. But the more he thought about it, the more disturbed he felt. Because, maybe, it was actually the truth. Due to the circumstances of his life, Sunny had never really done things because he wanted to. Most of the time, he was doing them because he needed to. It was never a question of want. It was always a question of must. For him, this was a basic rule of life. But was it really? Or was it just a matter of perspective? Neffys had certain advantages in her upbringing, but they weren't a sample Asha had imagined. She had no wealth and nor Senelo Frelix to empower her. However, she did have a mentality that was different from Sunny's. It wasn't impossible for her to have the audacity to disregard need in favor of something as frivolous as desire, and do things that a normal person like Sunny would never do. Like helping a blind girl simply because that was what Neffys wanted to do. Perhaps, that mentality was the greatest advantage of all. Perhaps, that was the real barrier that separated legacies from the rest of them. That was a lot to think about. However, before Sunny could gather his thoughts, Neffys suddenly spoke again. My turn. Does she mean it is your turn to ask a question? Indeed, that was what she meant. Changing Star once again turned to Sunny and, after a long pause, suddenly asked. Do you know the legend of Odysseus? Oh what? Who? What sort of a weird question is that? Bewildered, Sunny shook his head. Then, remembering that she couldn't see him, he said, no. Nephi sighed and turned away. A few moments later, she softly said, Odysseus was a hero in ancient war. In the legends, some humans back then had powers akin to the awakened. Achilles with an aspect of indestructible body, Diomedes that was so ferocious even the god of war was wary of him, Ajax who was a strong assagent. Odysseus was not the strongest, and not the bravest. However, he was the most cunning. Sunny blinked, staring at the silver-haired girl. What? Where did this come from? Why is she suddenly so eloquent? Meanwhile, Nephis continued. In the end, Odysseus' cunning ended the war, and had prepared to sail home. However, the gods cursed him to endlessly wander the seas, never to return. Over the years, he survived one horror after another and lost all of his companions. Then, shipwrecked, he found himself on an island where the beautiful fairy, Calypso, lived. Changing stars, the real, strangely wistful voice resounded in the darkness, creating an enthralling atmosphere. Sunny couldn't help but listen with the utmost attention. Calypso fell in love with Odysseus and invited him to her palace. For many years, they lived together in harmony. The island was like a paradise, filled with all kinds of wonders, delicacies and delights. As long as loving Calypso was by his side, Odysseus was even immortal. But, the longer Hess stayed, the more time Hess spent sitting on the shore, looking at the sea with bleak eyes. Nephis smiled. In the end, Odysseus built a makeshift boat and abandoned the island, leaving all its delights, the beautiful fairy, and even his immortality behind. So, my question is, why did Hell leave? Sunny blinked. What kind of a mind game was that? He even considered that Nephis was mocking him, but it didn't seem to be the case. It looked like she was sincerely interested in the answer. Weirdo, Heth thought for Abbott, and then said without too much conviction. Maybe it was because he was far away from home. A fleeting smile appeared on Nephis' face. Far away, from home. All right. After that, she turned away and lowered her head, becoming like a statue again. It seemed like their conversation was over. Grumbling internally, Sunny lay down and tried to fall asleep. However, the image of bleak-eyed Odysseus kept appearing in his mind. After a while, he whispered, well, did he make it back home? Soon, Nephis replied, yes, he returned to his wife and son, and they lived happily ever after. Satisfied, Sunny smiled and turned on his side. When he was already half asleep, he heard Changing Starry's quiet voice once again. This time, it was barely audible and aimless, asked how not directed at anyone. Odysseus was the first human to break the will of gods. In the morning, Sunny and Nephis were the first to get up. While the sun was rising and the sea was retreating, they made a fire and began preparing a simple breakfast. With Cassius still asleep, they did not talk to each other much. It was like the last night's conversation did not happen. However, after some time, they somehow ended up discussing the plan for the next few days. Nephis had some ideas. With what you told us about scavengers crowding to the west, the logical step would be to start moving east as soon as we can. Of course, north and south are also acceptable, but that won't put as much space between you and the enemy. Sunny nodded, agreeing with that logic. We have explored to the east a little, but not enough to confidently make it to the next high point in a day. That's the best course of action would be to spend today scouting a path to that group of cliffs over there and move the camp tomorrow. He sighed. Do you have any idea where? Would there be human citadel to the east? Nephis shook her head. I've never heard of a region that fits the characteristics of this place. In any case, we have to move to find out more. We'll either find a citadel, encounter an unconquered gateway, or east ice is good for direction Asani. Plus, it's the safest, because there's a horde of monsters to the west. At that point, Cassie suddenly sat up straight. Her eyes were wide open, and her face was a little pale. She looked nervous and excited. Nephis frowned. Cassie, what is the matter? The blind girl turned to them and smiled. A vision. I had a vision. Like, a prophetic dream. Sunny thought, trying to come to terms with this new reality of someone being able to see the future. Or the past. Meanwhile, Changing Star stretched her hand, asked how prepared to summon her sword. Are we in danger? Cassie energetically shook her head. No, it's not that. People. I saw a castle full of people. She smiled and pointed with her finger. I didn't know how far it is, but I'm sure that it isn't that direction. Sunny and Nephis looked at each other, not knowing whether to be glad or petrified. Cassie's small, delicate finger was confidently pointing west. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 39 to 39. Journey to the West. 1085 words. In the ensuing silence, the smile slowly disappeared from Cassie's face, replaced by confusion. Feeling the sudden tension, she asked, what is wrong? Sunny sighed. No, nothing is wrong. It's just that direction is the one we wanted to avoid. After some thought, headed. That's where I came from yesterday. There's a lot of scavengers down there. The blind girl's face fell. Oh, Nephis, who was quietly listening to them, gave him an indecipherable look and finally spoke. Tell us more about the castle. A shadow of the previous excitement returned to Cassie's. With a serious nod, she began describing her vision. I dreamed of a vast, ruined city built of weather-ed stone. It was surrounded by tall, impregnable walls. Various monsters were wandering its narrow streets. In the center of the city, there was a hill, and on that hill stood a magnificent castle. She smiled, but there were no monsters in the castle. Instead, it was full of people. I'm sure that they were awakened. Some were guarding the walls, some were going about their lives without a care in the world. There was food, safety, and laughter. Well, that sounds great. If this castle really existed, then all of their problems would be solved. Sunny cleared his throat. Did you see anything else? Cassie frowned, trying to remember. Then, her face cleared. Yes, I saw Sunny leading me through the gates of the castle. That means we will make it. A brilliant smile appeared on her doll-like face, beaming with so much joy that Sunny couldn't help but curl his lips. Inwardly, however, he was stuck on a certain detail off Cassie's vision. It was that, when talking about reaching the castle, the blind girl only mentioned the two of them. Was there some meaning behind it? Sunny turned his head a little and secretly glanced at Nephis, trying to discern if she had picked up on that little discrepancy, too. Changing Star, however, was as enigmatic as ever. Without showing much emotion, she thought for a while, and then slowly nodded. Okay, then we will go west. While the sea was still retreating, they had their breakfast and then spent some time planning for the journey and preparing to abandon the temporary camp. In the process, Sunny had a chance to talk now the girls a little better. It was then that Hekame To's sudden realization, which almost made his head explode from bafflement. That mind-blowing realization had Toto with Neffis. Back when they first met in front of the Academy's gates, Sunny had formed a certain impression of the confident, distant girl. Later, her behavior and the different revelations about changing stars past only served to reinforce that impression. Neffis seemed to exist a bit apart from the world. She was mysterious, aloof and rather cool. Her taciturn character and strange speech patterns made people interacting with her feel unnerved and rattled, often revealing more than they had been planning to. The less she talked, the more she seemed to talk now. That silent, indifferent confidence was arresting, and sometimes even oppressive. However, that impression turned out to be completely wrong. The actual truth behind the matter had nothing to do with being cool and aloof. After talking to her a bit more and observing their interactions with Cassie, Sunny almost fainted when her realized that Neffis was simply an incredibly, ridiculously, painfully awkward person. It was asked how she had no idea how to talk to people. Every time she tried to convey something, she would either use the wrong words or stumble in the middle of a sentence and fall silent. Her tone never matched what she was trying to say. Often, she would forget to put correct intonations in her speech, making questions sound like statements or vice versa. Added to that was the fact that, like many introverted people, Neffis was not in a habit of openly showing her emotions. It's not that she didn't have feelings, it's just that she was really bad at emoting them. As a result, her face always looked cold and neutral. Patsy, most of the time, she simply chose to talk as little as possible or not to talk at all. All of that added up together, then multiplied by her general weirdness, was ultimately responsible for creating the false image of a mysterious, unapproachable ice princess. When in fact, she was just shy and completely inept in communicating with people. After coming to that realization, Sunny tried with all his might but still failed to stop himself from staring at Neffis with wide eyes. He just barely managed to not let his jaw hang open. What the hell? That's not in line with how a protagonist should be. In his mind, Neffis had definitely been the type of person to be the main character of the event. At the center stage, there were always confident, strong people like her and Castor. People like himself and Cassie, on the other hand, were relegated to exist far away in the background. Now, however, no, that line of thought was also wrong. The fact that Changing Star had problems with expressing herself and lacked social skills did not mean that she was not strong. In fact, it might have meant the opposite. She still achieved everything that she had achieved, but with the added layer of adversity. She was still dangerous. At that moment, Neffis finally noticed that Sunny was staring at her. She looked at them and, after a long pause, asked in an emotionless tone. Quote. What? He blinked, extricating himself from this sudden flood of thoughts, and cleared his throat. Nothing. I was just going to ask when are we setting off. Neffis appeared to be thinking. After a while, she turned away and said, soon. You really can manage more than one word, can you? Utterly bewildered, Sunny hid his emotions and smiled. All right then. In the gray light of morning, they abandoned the tall hill and ventured west, retracing their steps from yesterday. Knowing the path, the small party made quick progress. Neffis was walking in front, her sword arm ready to strike at any moment. Abbott behind her was Sunny. This time, the responsibility of holding the golden rope and guiding Cassie along was entrusted to him. Of course, the actual creature, leading them was his shadow. It scouted ahead, carefully observing the labyrinth for signs of danger. The labyrinth was just as it was before, confusing and seemingly endless. Crimson blades of coral protruded from the black mud, creating a vast, tangled forest. However, today something about it felt different. It wasn't long before the shadow stumbled onto a mass of hulking, hungry scavengers. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 40-40, Weak Point. 1517 words. Halt, Sunny whispered, observing the group of scavengers through his shadow. As soon as word left his lips, Neffis immediately summoned her sword. After studying the surroundings for a second, she turned her head and glanced at them without question in her eyes. Cassia, meanwhile, froze in place and hesitantly raised her staff. Sunny counted the monsters. 1, 2, 3, 5. Curses. The hulking beasts seemed like the losers of the pack, similar to the one he had killed. However, their wounds were not as pronounced and terrible. Each of them was much more of a threat than the mangled one from before, and there were half a dozen of them at least. There are scavengers on the path ahead, 6 of them. They're slowly moving in our direction. Neffis cast a gaze forward. There was a calculating look on her face. They're done with the carcass. Sunny thought for a moment and then shook his head. No, I didn't think so. But maybe there's not enough meat for everyone anymore. So some stragglers had no choice but to leave with an empty stomach. Neffis nodded and gestured to an RB branching path. We'll circle around them. The 3 sleepers hastily moved forward and changed paths, giving a wide berth to the group of monsters. Tense and grim, they continued walking, trying to stay on course and not get lost in the labyrinth. However, in the next hour, they had to turn in a random direction again and again, avoiding other scavengers. The distance between them and the giant statue was not shortening at all. At some point, they were catching their breath near one of the numerous dead ends of the Crimson Labyrinth. They had no choice but to wait, since a large number of creatures was moving past their hiding spot, separated from them by a long length of a twisting coral passage. Sunny sighed and shook his head. Wekankun like that, at this rate, we'll never make it to safety before sunset. Cassie was the first one to react. Maybe we should turn back. That was a reasonable suggestion. However, Sunny felt reluctant to agree. Neffis shared his thoughts. With a blank expression, she said, it will only get harder tomorrow. She was right. By tomorrow, there would be even more scavengers flooding the labyrinth. Then what should we do? Changing Star tilted her head, thinking. After a while, she turned to Sunny. Fight against dozens of those monstrosities. Was she crazy? Sunny tried to hide his derision. Ash spoke. I know that you are skilled with the sword, but have you forgotten that each of those things is a whole rank above us? We once survived a fight against many. Neffis nodded. We avoid large groups, cut down smaller ones. After a moment, she added. If there's one or 2 of them, there's a chance. Sunny wanted to retort, but couldn't find a good reason. In the end, he gave up. Fine. Neffy stared at them for a while. Then, she suddenly asked, have you studied the corpse of the scavenger you had killed? What was that supposed to mean? A bit surprised, Sunny shook his head. No, he was too busy being in pain and trying to make it to safety before the sea returned. And why would he study a corpse? Wait, I think teacher Julius mentioned something. After a short pause, Neffy spoke. Scavengers have 3 weak points on their bodies. The first one is obvious, it's their joints. Anything that has to be flexible can be too rigid. So, there's gaps in the armor above the joints. By targeting the joints, you can diminish their mobility and attack capacity. Oh, so, by studying a dead monster, one could better understand their strengths and vulnerabilities. This idea was so obvious that Sunny admonished himself for not realizing sooner. Meanwhile, Neffy's continued, the second one is the same. It's where their torso connects to the carapace. If you manage to accurately hit that spot, you can heavily injure a scavenger and deal serious damage to its body. However, unless you succeed in severing its spine, the wound won't be fatal. It'll still be able to fight for a while. Sunny couldn't help but notice that changing star's awkwardness seemed to disappear whenever she talked about things that she felt confident about, like ancient heroes. Or killing things. Curious, the last weak point isn't their back, approximately at the level where the eyes are. There's a slightly concave, discolored cavity in your armor. Itis where several armor plates connect. The kite in their eye is comparatively thin. If you can pierce through it, you can destroy the brain directly. That will be killing blow. That is good talk now. However, that weak point was too high to be hit by a human. After all, scavengers were more than 2 meters tall. Asked how reading his thoughts, Neffy's added. That weak point every hard to target. Circling around a scavenger is almost impossible due to their size, speed and the attack range of their pincers. She looked at them and calmly said, If we stumble on a single scavenger, I'll bet the bait. My task will beto make it in around and then restrain it, exposing the third weak point. Your task will beto kill it. Sunny gulped. What if there's 2 of them? As usual, Neffy's paused before answering. Dinty, it wasn't long before they were left with no choice but to attempt a fight against a scavenger. Behind them, there was a long stretch of the labyrinth with no suitable branching paths for them to turn onto. Ahead of them, there was a small clearing with only one other passage leading out of it. Not far into that passage, a massive scavenger was moving slowly in their direction. Sunny quickly described the situation and waited for changing star's feedback. Without much delay, she gave him an We fight in the clearing. After that, Neffy's gently guided Cassie to the wall of the labyrinth and helped her find a place to sit. Wait here, we'll be back. After some thought, she added. Soon, as Neffy's moved to walk away, Cassie grabbed her hand. Her face was pale and tense. Neff, you, be careful, okay. Neffy's blinked and tilted her head a little. Then, she smiled. Sure. With that, she and Sunny hastily headed for the clearing. By the time they got there, the scavenger was seconds from appearing. Sunny's shadow flew out of the passage and reattached itself to his feet. Without having to discuss things with Neffy's, he quickly hid in the shadows and waited there, hoping for a chance to attack. Neffy's, on the other hand, strolled to the center of the clearing and calmly stood there, her shoulders relaxed and her back straight. An elegant longsword appeared in her hands, carelessly pointed to the ground. Not knowing what else to do, Sunny silently repeated her words. Dinty. A second later, the scavenger walked into the clearing. When his tiny eyes spotted Neffy's, a nevil light ignited in them. Without wasting even a second, the massive monster screeched and rushed forward to attack. Its huge pincer shot forward with terrifying speed, tearing the air in its path. Neffy swiftly sidestepped, dodging the pincer, then leapt backward, removing herself from the path of the rushing monster. Simultaneously, her sword flashed in the air, cutting deep into the joint ophone of the scavenger's front legs. Azure blood spattered on the ground. Of course, this small wound was too insignificant to slow the scavenger down. With surprising agility, it twisted and delivered a crushing sideways swipe. Neffy's, who just barely landed on her feet, had no choice but to deflect the blow with her sword. She managed to disperse most of the impact by holding the blade at the right angle, but the remaining force was still enough to throw her off balance. At that moment, the second pincer came down. Instead of trying to regain her equilibrium, Changing Star went with the fall and somersaulted over one hand, ending up distancing herself from the monster abbot. Her sword lashed out again. The follow-up attack followed almost immediately. However, Sunny did not care about the details anymore. The only thing he cared about was that, through this risky series of dodges and leaps, Neffy's had managed to circle to the opposite side of the clearing, forcing the scavenger to turn its back to the shadow in which he hid. It's now or never. Gritting his teeth, Sunny lunged forward. Before Changing Star finished her last dodge. Before the scavenger's pincer crashed on her from above. Before Sunny had time to become scared. He closed the distance between himself and the monster and jumped with all his might, landing on top of its carapace. Then, used all of his weight to thrust AHAND forward. Azure blade shimmered into existence in his grip and was immediately swallowed by the shadow. A breath later, the dark blade hit precisely into the concave, discolorated cavity in the scavenger's armor. With a crack, the chitin broke, allowing the tip of the sword to sink deep into the scavenger's body. The monster shuddered, and then heavily fell to the ground. Sunny was thrown from its carapace, landing in the mud with Arl. That easy. It was already over. Asked how tones are him, the spell voice resounded in the air. You have slain an awakened beast, carapace scavenger. Opening square bracket ... Your shadow grows stronger. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report.